Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the D and WhatIf, with another fanfiction. This is the second part of WhatIf Deku Awakens to a World Without Humanity. All credits for this video go to their respective authors, so please support the real author. Check out the link in the description for more details. Please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Izuku picked up the phone on the first ring, the sun starting to rise as his daily routine finished. Oh, hey Night-Eye, Overhaul is dead. Izuku blinked as the words set into his hazy morning brain. Overhaul? Wasn't he in jail? He was, Night-Eye confirmed, and his cell was isolated, so it couldn't have been another prisoner. This morning guard came by for a check and Overhaul was just dead. We can't even tell how it happened, since there's zero sign of injury. Was he sick? Izuku asked. Perfectly healthy the day before. And if this was an attack, the list of people with a grudge against a Yakuza boss is shy. I thought you should be the first to know, being the one who captured him, after all. Izuku was new to the investigative part of heroics, but he had a feeling this wasn't just a petty grudge. Thanks for telling me, Night-Eye, Izuku said. You'll call me if you need help, right? The line went silent, and Izuku was just about to check if he had been hung up on again when the man spoke. Of course. Open it, open it. I don't know, maybe we should wait for Dad and Mom. Akari wondered. Ni-san, Eri whined, pleading with her eyes. Adorable. Akari smiled, picking up the girl and placing her in her lap. All right, Eri adjusted herself, content. And Akari avoided her horn as she leaned over to open the package. She was expecting a letter, but instead, the fancy UA envelope dropped a metal disc on the table. A hologram lit up above the disc, casting Eri's odd face in blue light as it displayed a dark-haired man. Akari Midoriya, you got 135 villain points. When we add the rescue points your total score comes out to 151. The man yawned. That makes you the top score on the entrance exam, or whatever. Can't believe I have to do 19 more of these. Wow, you're amazing, Ni-san. It was a human exam and she had been training way longer than her competition. But getting first, especially when she tried her best, still meant a lot to her. Akari patted her sister on the head, and Eri leaned into the touch. Thanks, Eri. The doorway, like everything else in this school, was huge. Though with mutant quirks existing, like the tall guy sitting in the back with 6 arms, Akari could see why. More students filled in, taking seats near their friends. Akari wasn't really used to new people, ranking up with the same kids until she passed them. Having 19 new classmates was a little surreal, and she observed them as they made their first impressions. Humans called their abilities quirks, the abilities they suddenly gained as a child. Akari knew enough English to directly translate the word, a unique trait or habit. It made sense now, seeing her new classmates. Every human was strangely unique in some way, with physical differences even outside mutant quirks and emphasized personalities. Akari was happy to see that Tape Boy got in, especially. The angry blonde from before sat in front of her, slamming his feet onto the desk in front of him and setting off Engine Boy into a rant. Fuji, Akari said, getting the attention of the winged boy as he walked in. His was the only name she knew here, after all. Fuji glanced at her, surprised. Midoriya-san, right. Akari nodded. I remember you, it's been a while. It's lucky that we're in the same class. Akari cut off, her head snapping to the side. A muted presence, but with their mana unsuppressed it was like a beacon to anyone who could sense magic. A giant yellow caterpillar was slowly making its way across the floor, undetected to the talking students. When Akari stared at it, the caterpillar paused, standing up. Oh, a sleeping bag. That made more sense. The bag was unzipped with practiced speed, leaving an exhausted-looking man in a dark combat suit. The same guy who gave her the exam results. There was some kind of wrapping around his neck, and the conversations around the room slowly stopped as they noticed him. It took a full minute for you all to quiet down, and only one student here even noticed me come in. Much to improve on. My name is Aizawa Shota, and I'm your homeroom teacher. Behind me are your gym uniforms. Get dressed in the changing rooms and meet me on the field. Hurry up, you have 5 minutes. The scruffy man walked out of the room as he finished, leaving them rushing to comply. Aizawa-sensei seemed like a serious person, which was probably exactly what heroes in training needed. But at the same time, he seemed to exude an aura of pure exhaustion, like he was seconds from falling asleep. It didn't look like he had taken care of his hair once in his life, either. We're all human teachers like this. Dark eyes scanned the crowd. Today we'll be holding the quirk assessment test, a simple set of physical exams. But sensei, what about orientation? A brunette asked. Oh, girl, Akari saved. A waste of time, really. So every year, I've held this instead. You've probably done exercises like this to measure your growth throughout your schooling on Earth without any quirks. But now you'll have free reign to use your abilities, including magic, to get your best score. Lots of students seem to light up with excitement, getting to show off, test themselves. But whoever comes in last is expelled from UA University. Aizawa finished with an evil smirk on his face. Silence. Then, everyone started talking at once, protesting with loud voices that drowned each other out. Akari only smiled. A challenge was exactly what she was here for, after all. The rest, on the other hand, you can't do that. It's not fair, a blonde yelled, a black bolt running through his hair. Aizawa only raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. And, are you going to say the same thing when you're fighting for your life against villains? Or trying not to be eaten by a monster? But we passed the exam. A voice came from somewhere behind Akari. Congrats. Now you need to pass this. Aizawa cut them off. The man held up a red ball. Midoriya, you got first place in the entrance exam. As a demonstration, stand in that circle and launch the ball as far as you can. Akari caught the ball in her palm, feeling its weight as she stared at the field in front of her. She could hear the students whispering behind her, excited to see the top-placed examinee's abilities. She could, really, just toss the ball and get more than enough distance. After decades of training with Dad, her physical strength was nothing to scoff at, especially by human standards. But that would be boring. Moreover, she definitely wasn't going to spend 3 years holding back, and Akari had shown off her magic in the exam. If Akari was going to be a hero, then she might as well be the best one, right? Akari glanced back at the crowd. You might want to cover your ears. But girl with headphone like Jax did so immediately, along with a few others. The rest just seemed confused, though. At least she'd warned them. Akari's mana flowed out, a brilliant sphere of light enveloping the ball. Soon it was completely covered, a white projectile bristling with energy in her hand. It was almost too bright for the other students to look at, lighting up her face. Akari winded back her arm, YET, and launched the ball with all her strength. The white beam streaked through the clouds, vanishing in an instant. The boom came immediately after as the sound barrier shattered. The force knocked a few students off her feet. Their eyes wide as the wind blew past them, the bushes around them flattened. There was a giant hole in the clouds, stretching wide from where her throw pierced through. Akari grinned. It wasn't as strong as Dad's javelin. Not yet, but it was definitely pretty cool. Aizawa was still standing, impressively, despite being the closest to her. Akari could see a bit of his carefree mask break, eyes calculating. But then the tired look was back, just a second later. Infinity, you must have thrown it outside the atmosphere. Aizawa intoned, holding up the distance gauge. The rest of you, see this as an example to push yourselves as far as you can go. Holy shit. Did she say yeet? That chick just launched the ball into space. How do we beat that? Aizawa ignored them. Next, Akari felt a little guilty, destroying her classmates at the physical tests. Then again, some of them clearly hadn't trained their bodies at all, like that electric guy. Most of them were creative with their abilities. A guy who shot beams out of his stomach propelled himself for the sprint. And she saw Tape Boy launch the ball with a tape slingshot. Some people were perfect for a specific test, like when the brunette matched her score on the ball throw by removing its gravity, making it float into space. On the long jump, Fuji simply hovered with his wings until Aizawa sighed and told him to come down. A dark-haired girl seemed to be able to create objects with her body, which was probably the most useful quirk Akari had seen so far. Almost anything she'd need, right at her fingertips. She breezed through the tests, able to make the right item to get through each one while the red and white-haired guy created large amounts of ice, scoring high with similar ease. For some reason, though, the ice only seemed to come from his right side. In contrast, the invisible girl had it the worst. Being invisible was useless for physical tests. And while she was a lot more flexible than the majority of her class, she couldn't get an impressive score on any of them. Akari came in first, the dark-haired girl behind her. And third was the angry blonde, seething. Akari thought he did pretty well. Really, fire magic boosting his legs while explosions emitted from his hands for a lot of mobility. Her eyes slide down to the end of the list, wincing at the invisible girl's dejected pose. By the way, that was a logical ruse to make you try harder. No one is getting expelled, Hagakure, Aizawa said casually. The class burst into an uproar, Hagakure straightening up in surprise. We're already on the roster. Of course, he wouldn't actually expel us, the dark-haired girl commented over the fuss. Unfortunately, their teacher heard her. Actually, Yaoyorozu, I expelled the entire class the year before the drift. Her face changed from a reassuring smile into shock. The only reason the 20 of you aren't going home is that I see a bit of potential in all of you. Class is dismissed for today, so go check out your dorms. Before I change my mind, Aizawa finished. The field was empty of students in an instant. One had an entire building for their class dorms, called Heights Alliance. The girls would be moving into the right wing, with the guys on the left. Akari's room was on the 3rd floor. It was pretty similar to her room at home, with a green bed and blanket with purple walls. The stars lit up on the ceiling above her when she turned off the lights, and she had brought a few pictures to put up. There wasn't much yet, but she could probably take more from the house. Akari was sad to move out after living in her Earth apartment for so many years. It helped that Mom, Dad, and Eri were moving into the faculty building near her, but she couldn't help feeling homesick over living somewhere new now that she was really here. The class filtered into the first floor after setting up their rooms, taking spots among the couches. A girl with eye-catching pink skin and a bright smile spoke up, breaking the awkward silence. "Hello everyone. Now that we're all here, we should introduce ourselves. Name, abilities, and something you like. I'm Ashido Mina and my quirk's acid. I love dancing." Kirishima Ejiro, the redhead next to Ashido, said. "My quirk's hardening." Kirishima flexed his arm to demonstrate, the limb turning sharp and rock-like. "I like manly things." What did that even mean? Asuitsuyu. My quirk is called Frog, which is pretty self-explanatory. I learned a bit of water magic since I love swimming. Kiro. I'm Hagakure Toru. The invisible girl waved her sleeves at them. "I'm invisible, as Yao might have noticed. I'm trying to learn light magic, and I love dogs." Mashirao Ejiro. The blonde nodded, curling his tail behind him. "You can see what my quirk is. I'm learning enhancement magic, and I enjoy martial arts. My name's Rikido Sato, and my quirk is Sugar Rush. I love baking." Almost every head whipped to him, eyes wide. "You're free to use the kitchen whenever you want," Ashido promised, grasping his hands seriously. "Thanks, Mizo Shoji. My quirk is Dupli Arms," the tall boy with a mask said quietly. "I like cats." In contrast, the blonde next to him posed dramatically. "Yuuga Ayama. My fabulous ability is called Naval Laser. I love myself." How did he just? Fumikage Takoyami. "My fate is to be forever possessed by a powerful being. I am one with the darkness." Then a dark bird thing popped out of him. "And I'm Dark Shadow, cursed to forever possess a weak body. Oh, and I love video games." Humans were so weird. The boy with a rock-like head was up next. He seemed flustered as the room's attention turned to him, unable to speak. "I know sign language if that would be easier," Shoji asked, and the boy turned to him with relief. "He says his name is Koji Koda." Shoji glanced at the boy again. "And his quirk is Anavoice, letting him speak to animals. He loves nature." "My name's Kaminari Denki. Quirk, electrification. I love girls." Oh. Akari winced as the blonde was cut off with a sharp blow. The girl who just elbowed him rolled her eyes. "Ignore him. I'm Kyoka Jiru, and my quirk's earphone jack." Her long earlobes twisted into a lazy circle. "I love music." Haruto Fuji. "My quirk's called Angel Wings. I love pizza and flying." "Dude, that's so cool. Your quirk is just like Hawk's," Kirishima exclaimed. Fuji beamed at the redhead, his feathers turning a vibrant yellow behind him. "He's my favorite hero." "Who's yours?" Crimson Riot. "He's kinda retro, but he's just so manly, you know." "I'm Uraraka Ochako," the brunette next to Akari said. "My quirk's called Zero Gravity, and I love space." "Is that what you did earlier? Removed the ball's gravity so it floated off?" Akari asked, curious. "Yep." "Oh, and thank you so much for saving me from that giant robot." Uraraka trailed off. Ak Midoriya Akari. Akari realized that she was next to introduce herself anyway, and continued. "My quirk's called Demigod, and I know light magic." Airi flashed in her mind, and Akari smiled. "Love unicorns and Katsuden. In that order. Is it your quirk that makes you so strong?" Uraraka asked. "You threw the ball so fast it just went whoosh, then bam." Her hands moved as she talked with wild gestures. Akari couldn't help but smile at her antics. "Yeah, I got it from my dad." The angry blonde huffed when he realized it was his turn. "Name's Bakugo Katsuki. My quirk," explosion his hands sparked, "is a lot better than all of your lame-ass abilities. I know fire magic too, and like really spicy food." The elegant girl next to him narrowed her eyes at his arrogance. "My name is Yaoyorozu Momo, and it's a pleasure to meet you all. My quirk is creation, and I enjoy reading. I am Ida Tenya, and my quirk is called Engine. I am fond of studying and furthering academic achievement." Ida bowed formally. "I look forward to working with you all." Hanta Siro. "My quirk's called Tape, and I like comics." Tape Boy said. Everyone looked at the last student, the red and white-haired boy zoning back in when he realized they were waiting for a response. Todoroki Shouto. "Half hot, half cold," he said flatly. "And is something you like?" Kaminari prompted when he didn't continue. Todoroki stared at them for a full 20 seconds, as if Kaminari just asked him the meaning of the universe. Finally, Todoroki tilted his head. "Soba." Ashido clapped her hands like that hadn't been horribly awkward. "Great, now that we all know each other." Akari interrupted with a mental apology to the pink girl, desperately avoiding an icebreaker. "We should be eating dinner soon, right? Does anyone else know how to cook?" Among the other 19 students, there were only a few raised hands. She could see it dawn on them that they would need to cook their own food, that their class was now living together for another 3 years. Akari sighed. Izuku met 20 pairs of eyes with a smile, his runic cloak snug around him. He was probably just as excited as they were, to be honest, but he couldn't help it. Unlike magic, every quirk was almost completely unique. Furthering all of their abilities was going to be so cool. Hello everyone, my name is Midoriya Izuku, also known as the Hero Atlas, and I'll be teaching you foundational hero studies. A dark-haired girl raised her hand. You're the man who arrested Overhaul, are you not? Yep, you've heard about it, Izuku said. Several students spoke at once. I saw the video, it was so cool. How did you move that fast? What's your quirk? What will we be doing today, Atlas-sensei? You're right, I do have a powerful mutant enhancer. Though when you're in the classroom, please raise your hands like Yaoyorozu did when you have something to say. To answer your question, Ida. Behind him 20 slots opened in the wall, each holding a suitcase. Today you'll be getting used to your hero costumes. Izuku grinned at their excited faces. He lined them up in Gym Gamma, which he reserved the day before. He shouldn't have bothered really. UA had quite a few training areas, all just as big. The budget for the university truly was amazing. Izuku didn't know a lot about hero costumes. His own was literally just his favorite cloak. But he did understand the basic concept. Something to wear in battle, usually designed for ease of combat and to improve the effectiveness of a hero's unique abilities. Present Mike's directional speakers let him aim his voice quirk, for example. And Vlad King had a glove that removed his own blood for him to manipulate. Doesn't my cape look stunning? Aoyama asked. It does. All your hero costumes look amazing, Izuku praised. And they truly did, making the group of almost adults seem impressive, each imprinted with their own distinct style. That didn't change how horribly impractical some of them were, though. Aoyama's beautiful indigo cape was a glaring weakness, easily pulled on in a fight. Todoroki's entire left side was covered in what looked like fake ice. That would probably mess with the hot side of his quirk. And if it was symbolizing that the boy was just going to be using his ice, well, that was even worse. Yaoyorozu's costume was revealing. Though it made sense with her quirk, more exposed skin would let her wield her creations better and bring out bigger objects. It didn't change the fact, though, that she was practically asking to be hit in the stomach. It worked for Kirishima, whose ability was essentially armor, but Yaoyorozu didn't have that same luxury. He almost winced when he saw Hagakure's costume. It was probably tough to make a costume that could turn invisible, but a support department just giving someone gloves to fight in was absolutely ridiculous. Izuku would definitely bring this up to them later, but for now, he let them enjoy their first time being in costume, glancing at each other in awe. He gave Akari a thumbs up when he saw her, and she forgot to be embarrassed by him long enough to grin back. He put them through stretches first, getting their muscles ready for what they were going to do next. Plus, if a costume was too bulky or constraining to stretch, you probably couldn't fight in it. Some of his new students had barely stretched before, while on the opposite end Ashido looked like she was having fun. He had to concentrate on the feel of her light refraction to even get a vague idea of what Hagakure was doing. But the invisible girl was even more flexible than Ashido. When they were done, Izuku reinforced the air, creating a large purple dome in the center to function as the arena. I'll be pairing each of you off to fight, Izuku said. The rules are simple. If you are unable to move, surrender, or are forced out of the battle area, you lose. No maiming or other serious injuries, obviously. He ignored Bakugo's disappointed huff. When you're not fighting, try to observe your classmates since we'll be discussing the battles after. Any questions, Ashido? Are we allowed to damage the floor? The pink girl asked. Izuku blinked. Yeah, sure. The muttered yes was concerning. Anjiro was up first for his casual confidence, clearly used to sparring. He faced Fuji. The boy's wings turned a light red, tensing up behind him. As soon as the match started, Anjiro leaped. He flipped midair, building momentum as his tail swung down like a sledgehammer on his opponent. Fuji's eyes widened, wings folding above him just in time. The blow made him wince, knees bending from the force. Anjiro landed smoothly, tail sliding off the block as he aimed a flurry of jabs at Fuji's body. Fuji seemed to have some training as well, deflecting and countering with his own attacks. His wings shot forward, forcing the tailed boy to back out of range whenever they lashed out. The two danced around each other, launching wide attacks with their extra limbs. Fuji was doing his best to keep Anjiro away since his wings weren't nearly as agile as the boy's tail, but he was already tiring. Anjiro ducked under Fuji's left wing, landing a fierce punch before sweeping out the winged boy's legs from under him. The match ended with Fuji pinned on his back, wings flapping below him uselessly. Anjiro let him up once, Izuku called it, grinning despite the sweat on his face. Good fight. Fuji smiled back hesitantly, his wings flickering into a light yellow. You too. Ashido slid across the cement, her acid letting her skate circles around her opponent. The ground withered beneath her as she moved. Shoji was chasing after her, multiple arms growing to grab the pink girl. Ashido tossed globs of acid in wide arcs to keep him at bay. The tall boy was surprisingly agile, sidestepping her attacks. Izuku noticed that her projectiles didn't eat through the ground, meaning that she could effectively control how corrosive her acid was. To use her quirk in combat, she needs perfect control to avoid permanently injuring her opponent. This was probably how Shoji was catching up to her so easily. Subconsciously, Ashido was afraid of messing up and hurting him, so she wasn't aiming hard at him. Ashido was mobile in a way only years of practice could get you, dodging through the barrage of arms with grace. The girl didn't seem to have an actual basis in hand-to-hand combat though, so when Shoji did grab her, Ashido was easily tossed out of the arena. But there was definitely potential there. Aoyama had the right idea. Blasts of blue energy forcing Yaoyorozu to focus on dodging so she wouldn't have time to make anything. She seemed frustrated at first, unable to make anything complex, before the solution came to her. She had been commenting on the matches before her. Her tactical sense was impressive for someone so young. Yaoyorozu ducked under the next beam, a shield forming on her left hand as she sprinted toward the fancy blonde, the metal letting her deflect the light beams as she approached. The downside of freely attacking that much was the intelligent girl had now figured out his pattern, letting her weave through his increasingly panicked attacks easily. Aoyama's eyes widened as she got close, firing a huge beam. That literally backfired when the girl pulled a mirror from her stomach. The light reflected off the shining surface, crashing back into the unfortunate blonde and throwing him out of the arena. The less said about Hagakure and Koda's match, the better. Zero and Uraraka's fight went on the longest, a tense match to see whose quirk would grip the other first. Zero finally slipped up when Uraraka grabbed his next string of tape, removing the gravity and pulling the surprised boy towards her into a vicious punch before throwing him out of bounds. Kaminari let out all of his electricity in a single burst that Kirishima's fully hardened body tanked. The redhead lowered his arms to attack, only to find the blonde stumbling around with a dazed expression. Izuku definitely needed to fix that. Unleashing a single attack before becoming useless and vulnerable could get the boy killed. Fighting without frying his own brain would be great as well. Katsuki and Ada were up last for the day, since this would probably be the most intense match, and at least one of them would most likely need to visit Recovery Girl. Ada's hero costume was a bright white that protected his entire body, complete with a helmet. The well-designed suit of armor didn't seem to hinder him at all, instead offering protection that he was probably about to need. Katsuki's hero costume fit his demolition theme, with huge grenade bracers attached to his wrists. The bottom of his boots were bare, and Izuku immediately found out why. Mana concentrated into his feet, fire pushing out and launching him like a rocket as soon as Izuku started the match. At the same time, his arms pointed behind him and let off explosions, boosting him even further. Ada accelerated immediately, ducking just in time as the first flaming kick blazed over his head and swinging his own roundhouse to counter. Katsuki seemed ready for it though, blasting himself over the kick in an impressive show of control before landing behind his opponent and landing a searing palm to Ada's back. Take that, fucking 4 eyes. The other boy stumbled, recovering fast to throw an armored elbow. Katsuki easily sidestepped, a cocky smirk as he lashed out with a fiery leg, only for Ada's own engine-enhanced kick to slam into his attack with a crack. The blonde was knocked off balance and Ada's engines kicked into gear, grabbing Katsuki as he zoomed towards the edge of the arena. Katsuki reacted fast, twisting out of the taller boy's grip. His palms blasted away armored arms before scoring a clean hit on Ada's torso, a large explosion throwing Ada back. Katsuki lunged for Ada's helmet only to miss as the boy ducked, knee shooting up at his opponent's chin. Katsuki parried the attack with an explosion, showing off his pure reaction speed, before kicking straight up, a whip of flame striking Ada's chest with a hiss. Ada was exhausted, and while Katsuki was too, sweating only made the blonde's quirk powerful. Then Tall Boy's stance set into something determined, and his engines began to fire blue. His speed increased almost tenfold, as Ada streaked towards his opponent at a velocity that only Izuku could properly see. His first kick was a blur of silver that Katsuki's arms raised to block on instinct, red eyes widening as the powerful blow hit his side. The impact traveled through, knocking the blonde harshly to the ground as he tumbled. Katsuki rolled to his feet, blasting the ground as Ada approached. The rippling cement was a smart obstacle against an enemy too fast to defend against, but Ada was too fast, leaping over the attack and catching the blonde in a tackle. Katsuki blew him off with a blast, but Ada was already blazing back towards him, unfazed. There was no way for the blonde to dodge or counter another blow, so his hand drifted to the gauntlets on his wrist, but there was no way he was going to make it. Then Ada's engine stalled, blue fire giving way to smoke as the boy slowed to a stop a few meters away from his opponent. Unable to move, he was stuck, stiffening as he realized he was out of time. Katsuki released the pin on both gauntlets and all his built-up power burst. Pause. The explosion was like a blooming flower of fire, captured in front of Ada like art, his white armor glowing in orange and yellow light. Katsuki's face was frozen in a wide grin. Izuku passed the odd faces of his students as he stepped into the air dome, inspecting the flame. Pretty powerful for human levels, but not enough to seriously injure his strictest student. If Katsuki had more time to collect sweat, well, it would be a completely different story. Just to be safe though, Izuku carved away a bit of the explosion. He pushed Kaminari and Ashido, who were directly behind Ida, out of the way before stepping back. In huge twin blasts, slamming Ida into the wall with a massive crash. Ashido gasped, not even noticing she had just teleported as the armored boy slumped to the ground, unconscious. Meanwhile, Katsuki stumbled out of the arena, standing on pure stubbornness before collapsing onto Kirishima. Akari was staring at Izuku, the only one to catch a hint of what he just did, and Izuku winked at his daughter before picking up both of his fallen students. Great work today, everyone. Izuku grinned at the rest of his class. They really had been amazing, especially for the first day. Your fights were pretty impressive, though it got a little bit more exciting at the end than I expected. If you didn't battle today, then you'll be going next class. Remember to talk to me about any concerns or changes you want to make to your costumes. Izuku gave them a thumbs up at the chimed yes, Atlas-sensei. Class dismissed. Recovery girl didn't, in fact, kill him. You did the right thing, dearie. A simple exercise in a controlled environment. Better than I can say for some idiot, Shuzenji muttered, kissing both unconscious boys on the forehead. Izuku watched as the energy ran through their bodies, healing the results of their fight. The Bakugo boy is mostly just exhausted, and with my quirk, Ada will be fine after just a little rest. That said, Shuzenji's cane hit the floor with a sharp clack. I don't want to see any more of your students here for a while, understand? Yes, ma'am. Izuku gave her a salute, and she rolled her eyes at him. Bakugo, you can't put that much in there. Akari sighed. The blonde turned, a handful of peppers held over their curry. Why the hell not? You'll kill, like, half our classmates. Bakugo huffed. Serves them right, the weaklings. My preparation is due, Bakugo. Are you putting in all of those? Ajiro exclaimed. It's going to be spicy. But how are the rest of us going to eat it? Bakugo paused, considering. You have a point, Tail. I just told you my name. My cooking going to waste would be a fucking tragedy. The blonde went to remove the poison, tucking away half. Kaminari, Akari reminded him. Most of his peppers, muttering something under his breath about wimps and natural selection as he did. Kaminari coughed, hurriedly sipping his water. Man, this curry's really spicy. Todoroki blinked at him from his spot on the couch. I thought it was mild, I don't feel anything. Bakugo's head whipped back and forth between them, unable to choose who to lash out at. Ada-san, you're part of the Ada family, correct? I've heard that they have been in heroics for generations. Yaoyorozu asked. Akari closed her eyes, savoring the taste of her next spoon. Bakugo acted like a child, but his curry was pretty good. Ada pushed up his glasses. Indeed, just like my brother, Ingenium, I will become a worthy hero to fulfill my family's legacy. That's really cool, Ada. I wish my reason for being a hero was as noble. Uraraka trailed off. Akari glanced at her, curious. Can I ask why you became a hero then, Uraraka? The brunette fidgeted with her hands. For the money. My parents have a construction company, but they aren't very well off. But Uraraka-san, is your quirk not perfectly suited to such work? Yaoyorozu pointed out. That's what I said. Uraraka exclaimed. I could make all that heavy lifting so easy, and they wouldn't have to worry about machine costs. But they wanted me to follow my own dreams. Ever since I was a kid, I've idolized 13, the rescue hero. I'll rescue people just like she does, and earn enough that they'll never need to work again. Uraraka stopped in the middle of her speech, a little sheepish. It's not really as cool as the rest of you, I bet. So basically, you want to save people and help your parents? Asui asked. Yeah, I don't think you can get much nobler than that, Kiro. What honorable goals? Ada boomed. You should be proud of yourself. Uraraka's face turned red at the praise, arms flailing. It's not that big of a deal. What about you, Midoriya? Uraraka turned to ask. Why do you want to be a hero? Akari shrugged. I learned about heroes a few months ago. Ada coughed. And I was like, that seems kind of fun, why not? You came to you. Because you were bored. Yaoyorozu blurted, incredulous. Pretty much. Dad's a hero too. Atlas-sensei is your father, correct? You have the same surname. But I didn't want to assume, Ada said. Yep. It's kinda weird having your dad as a teacher, to be honest. Akari said. It seems we're both related to heroes, Midoriya-san. Please, just call me Akari. She didn't think she would ever get used to being called Midoriya-san. Mom, on the other hand, seemed to love it for some reason. Akari was used to given names. Having to worry about a surname, and when you had permission to call someone by their given name was just a hassle. Then again, with so many humans around, they would probably get confused without two names to identify themselves. Ada gasped, looking scandalized. Then you should all call me Tsu. Asui chimed in. Isn't it too early? Ada started. Tsu's eyes narrowed, cutting him off with a glare. Sue, Ada wilted, resigning himself to informality, and Yaoyorozu giggled into her hand. You know, I think I'm getting used to it, Kaminari said brightly, his eyes watering. This isn't spicy at all. Bakugo finally snapped, and his palms sparkled. Time to die, Pikachu. A high-pitched scream. Aizawa popped his head in, alert, saw a panicked Kaminari running around the couch while chased by a yelling Bakugo, then immediately walked back out the door. Setsuna showed exactly why she was a recommended student, splitting herself into 50 different pieces that each flew independently as they barraged her opponent, Nirengaki. The small boy seemed helpless against the onslaught of body parts, scrambling to dodge as they attacked him from every angle. It was then that Izuku truly gave up on making sense of quirks. Maybe Setsuna had a link to each piece of herself, letting her move telekinetically. But how was she breathing while separated like that? Setsuna wins, Izuku announced as Nirengaki was forced out of the purple arena after he was finally cornered. He had done well, really, considering how bad of a matchup his Twin Impact was against Lizard Tail Splitter. Twin Impact had an incredible amount of potential, offensive power growing exponentially with the user's physical strength. A fight like this would force the boy's skills outside his quirk to come into focus, something that was important when his quirk enhanced things that were already there. Their costumes were more practical than 1A's, Izuku noticed. Though there were exceptions, like that ceremonial armor weighing Shizaki down, most of the students had chosen gear to enhance the effectiveness of their quirks. They seemed to have fewer powerhouses, but the unique nature of their abilities made up for it. Maybe Eraserhead and Vlad King would let him pair the classes up against each other. That'd be interesting. Izuku raised an eyebrow as Katsuki stormed up to him. The rest of Wana not even out of the changing rooms yet. Where the hell are they? What do you mean? Izuku asked. Katsuki held out his grenade-like gauntlets, intact except for the missing firing pins on the front. Don't treat me like a fucking idiot. Ah, those. Don't worry, they haven't been misplaced. I just removed them for now. The blonde scowled. This is about that fucking glasses, isn't it? Why? His stuck-up ass is completely fine. This time, at least. Izuku cut him off. Katsuki. How full were your gauntlets when you pulled the pin? Katsuki hesitated for a split second. Not very. The match didn't last long, so I didn't have much sweat built up. The pause before his answer was obvious after decades of dealing with bullshitting students. Your gauntlets are designed well, Izuku said. They function as bracers, protecting your wrists from the backlash of your quirk. But more importantly, they store your explosive sweat as you fight, letting you unleash it in a huge blast later. I fucking know. But your gauntlets don't actually tell you how much sweat is stored up, right? Izuku continued as if he hadn't been interrupted. Of course, they might weigh a little more as they charge, but ultimately, you have no clue how powerful of a weapon you're about to use. From what I gathered, the blast you launched carelessly, Katsuki stiffened, was at around 10% of the gauntlet's max capacity. It was a short fight, but you still managed to build up enough sweat for quite some force, not to mention how you fired off both on a whim. Katsuki's eyes widened. I thought the left one didn't fire when I was sure I pulled both. That was you, wasn't it? You're fucking fast enough now to block half of it without anyone noticing. Izuku nodded, meaning that you only hit Ida with 5%, yet you knocked him out for a day. If he wasn't wearing that armor, he might have even broken limbs. Unlike your carefully controlled explosions, your support gear is truly lethal. If you want to use them in the field, you need to prove to me you understand that, Katsuki. Izuku didn't know much about being a hero, but he did know what controlling overwhelming power was like. And that knowledge was exactly what a boy with this much pride and drive needed. To be honest, most of Akari's new classes were pretty boring. She didn't mind having an easier year, but there was a point where it just felt slow. You would think that with a divine sense of time an hour would breeze by. Wrong. It was the opposite. Every pained minute stretching more than it should as Cementos talked about literature. It helped a little that all her teachers were unique, each with their own pro-hero persona. The amount of innuendos Midnight dropped in a single class was incredible, some so subtle it was like a verbal scavenger hunt. Present Mike was a bit too loud, but he did teach the only new subject she had. Akari had almost zero background in English, so learning it actually took some effort. Maybe she should learn other human languages. She'd probably never use them, though. Akari sighed. She couldn't wait for heroics, where she could work off her boredom by beating someone to a pulp. Wait, that sounded bad. Bakugo was sulking when Akari walked in, which was weird, but the lack of screaming was definitely welcome. Today we'll be finishing off the battles from last class for those who haven't gone yet. Dad's clear voice carried throughout the gym as he set up his fancy air sphere, the arena brimming with purple mana as it expanded. What a show-off. He could have just drawn a circle or something. Sato pulled a sugary treat from his hero costume, and his muscles bulged as he ate. A bright yellow costume stretched with him as his quirk activated, and the boy rushed forward, only to cover his ears as a wave of sound blasted past him. Jiru's jacks plugged into her legs, weaponizing her heartbeat in vibrational bursts. She crouched low on her side of the arena, focusing her attacks on Sato's head. Akari winced. No matter how durable Sato's quirk made him, that noise wouldn't hurt any less. If her ears were ringing from here, then the boy must be in agony. Sato's fist smashed into the ground in front of him, cracking open the concrete. Jiru sidestepped the fissure, forced to cut off the audio as she moved. Sato leaped towards the girl in the opening, fists already swinging as he landed. Jiru ducked under his punches easily, edging towards the boundary. It seemed that Sugar Rush didn't make Sato any faster, only enhancing his physical strength. In fact, the added muscle mass made him even slower. Combined with how straightforward he was in his attacks, Sato was just too predictable. Jiru was just about to be pushed out when her ear jacks suddenly stabbed straight for the boy's eyes. His hands immediately rose to cover his face in reflex, and Jiru used the distraction to step behind him. Jiru's jacks went into the amplifiers on her arms, releasing a powerful short-range blast into Sato's back, knocking him out of the purple dome. Akari walked into the arena as Jiru helped the boy up, Todoroki doing the same. They were the last ones to fight. The purple arena grew bigger as if in preparation for the mayhem they were about to cause. Akari's hero costume was simple, a green cloak with runic designs similar to Dad's. Unlike his, though, it was more reinforced, and its cloth was weaved just for her. She could see Todoroki's scar completely. Facing him like this, a deep red reaching down the left side of his face. His eyes were just as mismatched as his hair, a bright blue contrasting with a dark gray. More importantly, though, was the large layer of fake ice covering the left side of the body. Not only did this boy have zero fashion sense, but he'd also rendered his left arm completely useless. With his quirk was called half hot, half cold. "You're not going to use your fire, are you?" Akari asked. Todoroki's emotionless face didn't shift, but his heterochromatic eyes narrowed. Akari shrugged. "You're only handicapping yourself after all, so it's fine." "Start." Todoroki's right arm swung forward, and with it came a wave of ice crashing toward her like a tidal wave. That Akari shattered with a single slash, blade of light bright in her hand. "As long as you're strong enough to go without it." Lines of spikes taller than she was, pillars rising beneath her, and sharp ice fragments fired at her body like bullets. Unlike most of their classmates, Todoroki seemed experienced, launching dangerous attacks with a familiarity you could only get from years of sparring. Akari's physical abilities could be held back to peak human levels, but she couldn't turn off her reflexes, her dynamic vision. Her sword sang through the rapidly chilling air, reaping his ice with precise slashes as she countered his attacks. Todoroki couldn't manipulate ice, Akari realized, as each of his constructions was stuck where they were instead of being used again. Sure, that was less space for her to dodge, but the leftover ice wasn't even an obstacle. His right side cooled down the air, letting him create ice from the water vapor. Akari had no clue, and it didn't really matter where he was getting it. What did matter was how she could feel her skin getting colder, her uncovered hands bristling just before his next attack. Akari could sense mana now, somewhat, but sensing quirks was usually impossible. Dad could do it, but well was weird. Todoroki's ice, though, was enough like elemental magic to let her trace it. It also helped that whenever the boy attacked, his right arm whipped around he was conducting an orchestra. Akari frowned. Her opponent hadn't actually moved a single step the entire match. She must be going way too easy on him. That could be fixed. Akari dashed at him, batting away ice shards. She flipped over a massive hand that drilled through the concrete under her and sidestepped a massive spike before ducking under the twisting ice pillars before slashing them apart. She hadn't had the chance to be this acrobatic in ages, and it felt wonderful. Todoroki didn't seem to share her opinion though, his attacks getting larger and larger. Todoroki stomped and the ground froze, covering the concrete with ice like a snowy field. Akari's feet were now stuck to the ground as another wave rushed towards her. Akari pushed off the ground, shattering the ice around her as she kicked off. She rose high into the air, the purple dome now so wide she didn't need to worry about hitting its ceiling. She could see his breath clearly from above, white mist blowing against his ice. Todoroki glared up at her, gritting his teeth in concentration. Ice spikes emerged from the entire arena below her, flying up in a single inescapable attack. Akari's sword glowed with mana as she swung, energy trailing behind the mighty slash and cleaving through the attack with an arc of light. She fell, forcing Todoroki to dodge as she crashed down where he previously stood. "What's it with you and spikes, man?" Akari asked. She was getting a little tired of his lack of creativity. Before the stunned boy could reply, Akari suddenly launched her sword, the blade flying in a deadly line for her opponent. Todoroki instantly raised an ice wall, but it pierced through with ease, narrowly missing his face as it scored a small cut on the right side of his face. His eyes widened, his body quivering more as he raised another defensive wall. Wait, Todoroki wasn't trembling. He was shivering. But why would he be? Akari couldn't help it. She laughed, so bright that she could feel the chill recede and so loud that the other students probably thought she was insane. This was so stupid. What? Todoroki growled. Oh, he must think she was laughing about hurting him. Sorry, it's just your quirk. Akari snickered. You're throwing around half your power, just your ice, out of pride or something, instead of fighting with both your ice and your fire. If you had magic, then that would make sense. But I forgot that you have a quirk. And, Todoroki prompted, a little annoyed. Sorry, I ramble a bit sometimes. Quirks have different side effects and backlash from their use. I was like, why is he shaking? I'm not even that scary. But then I realized that when you reduce the temperature, it affects you too. Todoroki's right eye twitched. That means all you've done this entire match is damage yourself and act too stubborn to stop. Right now, you're freezing your own body and rapidly reaching hypothermia, which looks really painful. Why don't you warm yours? I'll never use his power. Todoroki snarled. I don't care. I'll become the number one with just my mother's ice. The floor around them was wrecked, pieces of ice littered throughout. Every ice creation had been decimated, leaving Todoroki with nothing but debris and a cut on his cheek that was starting to bleed. The air now felt freezing cold, and she could almost hear his teeth chattering. Meanwhile, Akari didn't have a single scratch, costume almost pristine despite the fight. She raised an eyebrow. And how's that going for you? Akari asked. I don't even need to beat you myself. You're freezing yourself out of commission for me. How are you going to be a hero like that, much less the best? The air temperature suddenly dropped even further, the chill making Akari wince as it swept past her. It was a full-on glacier, jagged and so huge that for a second she could see nothing but all-encompassing ice rushing towards her like a tsunami. Akari's mana focused into her hand, more and more until it was too bright to see her own fist. Then she punched. The massive storm fell to her blow, shattering into a million pieces that rained around her. The arena turned solid, a reinforced wall protecting the audience from the shrapnel. The shockwave rammed into Todoroki's body, and an instinctive wall was all that stopped the boy from flying out of bounds. The ice cracked as it stopped his momentum. Todoroki was completely shivering now. Akari was on him as soon as he managed to stand up with a series of jabs. She batted away a freezing palm before landing a hit on his shoulder, and then another to his chest. Todoroki was good at hand-to-hand combat, but while exhausted and half-frozen he was just so slow. He ducked under a kick just in time, and the attack destroyed the damaged wall behind him. Todoroki's right hand moved for the last time, swinging a sword of ice that she punched straight through like paper. His mismatched eyes went wide as her fist struck his gut before she spun, launching a crushing kick that knocked him out cold. Akari picked up the unconscious boy as the match was called, his skin so icy it stung. That wasn't just pride. There had to be a reason Todoroki wouldn't use his fire, even when he was almost completely frozen. But why? Izuku walked in for homeroom, and a surprised class stared back at him. Atlas-sensei, Uraraka asked, tentatively, why is there a little girl playing with your hair? And where's Aizawa-sensei? Izuku smiled, patting Yuri's leg. The girl didn't stir from his spot on his shoulders, completely focused on her task. She wasn't doing a very good job, but she was having fun. Maybe he'd ask Aurora to teach her. This is my daughter, Iri. She's 11, Izuku said. Iri looked up when she heard her name, meeting 20 pairs of eyes, before flustering under the amount of attention. Today is a little different, so you'll be in heroics for the entire day. She's the cutest thing I've ever seen, Ashido declared immediately. Hagakure nodded her entire body in agreement. Iri waved shyly at the students, and Ashido squealed. What will we be doing, Atlas-sensei? Yaoyorozu asked, unable to resist waving back at the girl. We'll be going on a field trip to the USJ for rescue training. This isn't necessary, so you can opt out if you really want to, but it's a valuable experience. When no one spoke up, Izuku continued. We'll leave in about 10 minutes, so suit up in your hero costumes. A few students had taken his costume suggestions. Izuku noticed. Aoyama's red cape was gone from his shining armor. The boy had been reluctant but gave in after Izuku convinced him that it wouldn't be very stylish to get pulled by. Uraraka switched out her heels, and her new shoes could absorb her landings even better. Eraser had met them at the buses, his eyes scanning over their students as he counted them over. Izuku raised an eyebrow. Did you think I lost one of them? Izuku asked. Eraserhead muttered something about not underestimating the hellspawn before climbing into the bus. Ada tried to organize the class seating before Yaoyorozu, the new class president, pointed out that they didn't need to. Eraserhead was already bundled into his yellow sleeping bag like a caterpillar when they filled in. Izuku took a seat near the front with Iri, conversations starting up behind him as the bus started moving. Akari, I've been told that I'm very direct at times. Can I ask you something? Isui started. Akari smiled at the frog-like girl. I've noticed that, too. Your magic is really advanced, far more than from anything I've seen heroes use so far. Where did you drift to learn that much? Several students seemed to lean in, interested in learning about their strongest classmate. Even Katsuki had stilled at the question. Akari shrugged. It was a pretty normal world. My school taught us magic. My mom's even better than I am at it. And she taught me almost everything I know about my light magic. What about the thing with the different colors? Zero asked from the back. I saw you fight during the entrance exam with them, but since then your magic's just been a pure white. Akari used prism, splitting a small white ball into her lights. I call it prism, sort of a trump card. Akari grinned, a little bit of challenge in her eyes. None of you have made me use it yet, though. I'll take you on any day. Flashlight. Katsuki barked. That's so manly, Midoriya, Kirishima said. He glanced down at his hardened arm. I wish my quirk was that flashy, but it's kinda boring. Your quirk definitely isn't boring, Kirishima. Izuku cut in. That kind of defensive ability is incredibly useful in a fight and is also perfect for protecting people. Not to mention that you look pretty cool when your quirk is fully activated. Kirishima's face was almost as red as his hair. Thanks, Atlas-sensei. What about me, Atlas-sensei? A student chimed in. Or me. Hello, everyone. 13 greeted them, her full spacesuit on. Welcome to the USJ, otherwise known as the Unforeseen Simulation Joint. Uraraka's eyes were wide. Oh my god, it's 13. This is the best day of my life. Eraserhead rolled his eyes as several others had similar reactions to the rescue hero. 13 launched into a great speech about how dangerous their abilities could be. Iri, still on his shoulders, was hanging on her every word. Instead of listening, though, Izuku's attention was focused on something else. Some kind of strange energy was forming below, at the central plaza. Not magic, so it had to be a quirk of some kind. Eraserhead picked up on his alertness and turned. Then the energy condensed into a mass of darkness, pitch black with dark purple edges, extending wide as a group walked through. The first figure was a normal-looking man with a pleasant smile, a fashionable suit fitting his form. His hair was pure white, just like Izuku's. The second was normal, a younger man covered in severed hands trailing after the first figure like a child would a parent. A third wasn't the slightest bit normal, a giant hulking creature with black skin that had red scars running through it. The monster had a beak and its brain was exposed. A small army of humans followed, filled with confidence and cocky smirks. The last one through was a cloud of darkness in a suit, obviously the one who made the portal that closed behind him. An attack, then. He squeezed Iri's leg in reassurance, before placing her in Ashido's arms. Izuku smiled at them before walking up to Eraserhead's side. What's going on? Is this an exercise? Kirishima asked, a bit of fear in his voice. This isn't an exercise. Those are villains, Eraserhead stated. All traces of exhaustion had vanished, sleepiness fading to reveal a veteran hero as he barked out orders. Kaminari, use your gear to try to get a signal through. Koda, are there any birds around? It's not working, everything's jammed. Kaminari responded. Koda shook his head. Then we'll have to get Ida out, he's the fastest runner. Eraserhead cut off as the villains approached, getting into earshot. The white-haired man spoke, as smooth as silk. Hello, Yue. We're the League of Villains. It's a pleasure to meet you. Who are you, and why are you here? Eraserhead demanded, his scarf unraveled. The villain merely tilted his head at the hostile tone. Asking for someone's name without introducing yourself is rude, Eraserhead. He chuckled as the underground hero continued to glare at him. My name is All for One. That was pretentious, but it somehow suited the man. Why did you come here, All for One? Izuku asked. He was looking forward to this class, too. Oh well, at least he'd get an interesting fight out of it. Maybe his class would learn some. Atlas, right. I'm here for One for All. If you could hand it over, that would be wonderful. Izuku blinked. One for All. Like the opposite of his name. What's that? Don't play dumb with All for One's eyes narrowed, searching for something. They were a deep crimson, like blood. His hand twitched, and Izuku could feel mana crackle with the movement. Enhancement magic, just like. You think I'm All Might? Izuku realized. Yeah, I don't have that blessing. And even if I did, I definitely wouldn't give it to you. Eraserhead tensed next to him, clearly confused but listening intently. All for One paused, considering. So you're not the successor, then? Assuming that you were, or even that the Big Oaf had one, was a bit of a leap. I don't have the ability you want. There isn't a reason for you to be here anymore. Leave. A bit of anger flowed into the last word, making several villains flinch. Izuku loved fighting, but attacking him along with his family, his students, unacceptable. All for One hadn't moved, but now his full attention was on him, calculating. You don't have One for All, but you're not a normal hero at all, you're something different, something stronger. As for your request, we won't be leaving just yet. We still have a second goal to fulfill. The death of every student behind you, there. All for One stated calmly. The pleasant smile didn't change but now just felt cold. Tamura, take the party in boss and kill all of them. I'll have a nice chat with this one. Handman reacted to the name. And the army, monster, and suited darkness followed him as he marched towards the class. Eraserhead's voice was completely steady, calming down the terrified students. Gather together and don't move until I tell you to. 13. Be ready to use your quirk. 13 didn't seem to have much combat experience, but they were a hero for a reason and could hopefully defend the students. Eraserhead was incredibly skilled for a human, and Izuku didn't doubt that he could take on the weak-looking army of villains easily. The newly named Tamura and Portal villain were more of a threat though, and that monster, from what Izuku could tell, that thing was as strong as All Might. He had no idea how they had a monster following commands, but it would snap his co-workers like toothpicks. Izuku would have liked to defeat that thing himself before wiping out the rest, but he couldn't risk taking his eyes off All for One. He'd have to rely on Akari to kill it, and that made him grit his teeth. All for One raised an eyebrow, surprised when Izuku didn't move. You're not going to help them with that, so the best thing to do would be to deal with this man as fast as possible. Who had the nerve to try to kill his class? Add some confidence, hero. Izuku stepped behind him. All for One reacted in an instant, whirling around as a green barrier formed between them. That Izuku's fist shattered, continuing to slam into the irritating man's face. All for One's body tumbled against the ground, and Izuku dashed in to follow up with a kick. Suddenly, something welled up from his enemy and Izuku leaped back just in time, spikes erupting from the man's chest. The metal retracted into his body, a centimeter away from impaling Izuku, red energy crackling along their edges. That one's called Spike Body. All for One explained proudly, like he was showing off a new phone. As he spoke, his jaw lit green as it mended itself some kind of healing. Izuku recognized that energy, a quirk, but nothing like he'd ever seen before. It was confusing, so fragmented yet running through his body like mana. Now that Izuku looked closer, it was like a set of parts. His face was the most emphasized in the array as the healing quirk worked. I thought people only got one quirk, Izuku asked, confused. If each of those fragments of energy were a separate quirk, then this human was even stronger than All Might. All for One laughed. Usually, yes. I'm a bit of a special case though. He raised his hand as a third quirk activated, and with a tunnel of wind shot forward like a miniature hurricane, only to do nothing, rolling off Izuku's body harmlessly like a gentle breeze as the air was tinted purple. Attacking Izuku with air was like splashing water on an island. Fascinating, All for One said. Some kind of air quirk. Or was that mag? The reinforced air shifted. I don't really care for a chat right now. Izuku cut him off. 4 bladed chains pierced every one of All for One's limbs, looping back to wrap around the man like a mummy. Lightning sparked, a bright yellow that ran along the chains to Izuku and made him wince. With a single tap of All for One's hands, the purple bindings unraveled into nothing, and 2 bolts of lightning lanced towards the hero. Fair enough, All for One replied casually like his arms and legs hadn't just been stabbed. Izuku's trusty staff spun, deflecting both attacks. He had no idea how the chains had been broken, but Izuku knew that All for One's regeneration had limits now. His legs were still bleeding, healing too slowly to let the man move, and his arms were in similar condition. Yet despite how much that must have hurt, All for One's face hadn't even twitched. Izuku ducked under a burst of flame from the man's mouth. With no way to dodge, the man was vulnerable. Stance 2, bash, and the glowing staff slammed into All for One's stomach, throwing him across the plaza in an unwilling tour. The man crashed into the ground near the flood zone, the impact wrecking the area below. Izuku leaped near the crater, seeing his enemy in an unconscious heap, the biggest threat dealt with. Then All for One disassembled. Like a glitch in a video game, his wounded limbs dissolved before reforming completely healed, new limbs attaching to his body. It was strange to watch, like he was rewriting himself. Even his suit stitched itself as good as new. All for One rose, completely unharmed, a slight smirk playing across his face. Overhaul, a ridiculously useful quirk, wasting away on some low-time Yakuza. All for One said, I suppose I have you to thank for practically wrapping up the quirk in a gift for me. You can take quirks. Izuku realized, what an amazing power. The potential it had was limitless. It just like Overhaul, it ended up with a villain. All for One smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. His fingertips lit up, red energy shooting out like streaks of light. What gave it away? A shield of air blocked the projectiles, and Izuku's staff spun, stopping the lightning that followed. All for One was forced to duck as a chain sliced past his head and disassembled a second one. The name, Izuku answered honestly. All for One should have set off red flags in his head. Really? All for One's hands slapped the ground and it opened underneath Izuku in a gaping pit. The edges of the abyss were jagged, and Izuku caught himself on a purple platform as he fell before jumping up, the earth shutting beneath him like a giant jaw. 2 deep blue dragons shot out from All for One's back, zooming towards Izuku's airborne form. The hero twisted, easily shattering both with twin kicks. Izuku landed, launching the air in a spiral that drilled towards his enemy. It was casually ripped apart as well, but the purple covering his view let Izuku land another blow to his face. Izuku leaned back, a deadly hand just short of grabbing him. Stance 1, sweep, and knocked All for One down. and the man was forced to fix his destroyed legs. Izuku leaped away, safe. Izuku grimaced. Overhaul was way too overpowered. Not only could All for One heal his body completely, but he could also attack like he'd mastered earth magic. And with a single touch, it would be over. Out of the corner of his eye, Eraserhead engaged the crowd of villains, knocking them out with practiced ease. Behind him were the students he was protecting, and 13, who was glaring at Tamura and the portal guy. They were too close, so Izuku couldn't just go all out on the terrain around them. All for One, however, seemed to have zero issues with that, reforming it to his will as he attacked haphazardly with an array of different abilities. The man could be as unpredictable as he wanted. There was no way of knowing how he'd attack next. He even had magic, enhancement magic flowing through the mass of quirks like a booster. Unlike All Might, who enhanced his body with it, All for One enhanced his powers themselves. And All for One didn't have to worry about protecting kids. How annoying. But was the man really completely unpredictable? Izuku wondered. All for One fought like a strategian. Every quirk perfectly used in attacks and traps and combinations. He reacted faster than what should be possible for a human. It must be a mental quirk or several, meaning that Izuku was basically fighting a calculating robot instead of a person. Mana flowed down Izuku's body into his feet, then through the ground towards the lake. A well-oiled machine was still a machine. Izuku found the pattern and rushed forward, his staff swinging down just like before. All for One reacted. Finger beams activated to fire. A green barrier formed to block the attack. Regeneration surged in anticipation. Hands reached to counter with Overhaul, and lightning sparked to follow up. The air froze around Izuku's staff as he let go of his weapon, a ridiculous move to block the red lasers All for One would never predict. The green barrier hovered uselessly with no staff to hit it, and lethal hands grabbed at nothing as Izuku gracefully sidestepped, grinning as the lightning erupted from All for One's form. Before the tsunami washed over him, tinted purple as Izuku bent the water to his will. All for One's eyes went wide, too late to stop that last quirk. Kaminari Denki's quirk was electricity, letting him discharge voltage from his body like a battery. Zapping Kaminari did nothing but charge the boy up. Whatever All for One was using, though, Izuku could tell it was nothing like his students. The ill-timed electricity crackled, current zipping through the water and into the villain inside it. Akari watched as Aizawa fought, his capture weapon wrapping up enemies and tossing them around. Quirks were erased with glaring red eyes, leaving confused villains completely open. He wielded the sword in his hands well, countering attacks and knocking out humans with the flat of the blade. And to top it off, vicious kicks met anyone too close. This man was nothing like the unkempt, sleepy teacher she knew, and she almost didn't recognize him. Pretty badass though. She'd immediately gotten Ada out through the large hole now in the doors. 13 was holding the black cloud guy back with careful use of her black hole. He had almost redirected 13's quirk against her, but luckily the hero had dodged in time. Akari wasn't very helpful there. She couldn't tell where hitting him would actually do shit, and her light magic would be aimed at her classmates. Eraserhead had given some of them permission to use their quirks on the army of villains. They were really weak, and Wana was mowing through them like grass. Akari kept an eye on her little sister, Ashido protecting her near the rear. She'd have to thank her after this. Eraserhead was fighting defensively, instead of just carving straight through them, and Akari could see why. The guy covered in hands and the huge monster were waiting, watching the battle. Tamura, as the boss guy had called him, was a much bigger threat than the cannon fodder in front of them. He seemed thin but lean, and his hand was vigorously scratching his neck in agitation as the villains fell. What worried Akari even more, though, was the bird thing. It was tall, and she could feel how powerful it was. It wasn't like any monster she'd ever heard of before, standing still and only reacting to Tamura's orders. Minutes passed, the army of villains thinning. A few students were trying to help 13, but Kurogiri was experienced, running circles around them even after Bakugo figured out his solid part. She fired off a few stray shots at Tamura, but the monster moved in front of him, tanking the attacks easily. In the distance the ground shook, Dad no doubt's beating the crap out of the leader. This battle's getting boring. Our summons are fucking pathetic and not getting anywhere. Tamura mused. Oh well, Sensei will be happy if I finish early. The scratching stopped. Namu, kill. The giant bird thing moved. It was like Akari's limbs were filled with lead. The students and villains around her were in slow motion. Aizawa was punching a woman in the face, a rare blink stretching on forever, and one of Kurogiri's portals was slowly opening, an oval of collapsing darkness. The Namu, meanwhile, was jogging, bulky arms reaching out to crush her closed-eyed teacher so fast that none of the humans could even track it. But Akari knew exactly what this was like. Trying to move at Dad's speed was like moving underwater, every movement a painfully slow process. It was as if he'd conquered time itself, and you could do nothing but watch as he drifted through it as easy as could be. Namu, well, was nowhere near as fast as he was. She leaped, her arm lifting up as white mana concentrated into her hand. She wasn't moving fast enough. The Namu was almost there. Its palm way bigger than Aizawa's head, so she pushed herself to be faster, and now it was less dragging herself through the currents and more swimming. In a single movement, Akari pushed her teacher out of the way and a completed white sword slashed up, cutting off the monster's arm. The black limb fell to the ground, and everyone blinked as they both seemingly teleported. Midoriya, get back from that thing, Aizawa shouted. His concern was admirable. But Aizawa, you stand zero chance here. Let me handle it. Aizawa wasn't stupid, but she could see how much it hurt him to have a student fight the bigger threat as he turned, punching the next villain a little too hard. What's this? Tamura said. Someone brave enough to take on the Namu. How interesting. Like a bad horror movie, the stump on the monster's hand regrew until in seconds it had a fully functional arm once more. Tamura snickered. You don't stand a chance against a boss of this level, though. A boss level? Huh. Akari grinned. That sounds pretty fun. Tamura started. She could do without the whole kill order thing, thanks. Out of her non-sword hand, a whip of light struck fast, forcing the man to leap back. It clipped his face, slapping the hand off, and it landed on the ground. She was just collecting severed limbs now. Angry red eyes, pale skin, and chapped lips were revealed to the unfortunate world. Akari winced. On second thought, you can put that thing back on. Father, the weird guy shrieked. What? You dare? Namu, kill her. Akari launched her sword straight forward. As predicted, the Namu dashed in a direct line for her, letting the blade pierce through its exposed brain. Naturally, this made it pause for exactly 1 second before it started moving again. She was going to need to do a lot more than that. Prism. Akari didn't even get to say her super cool name out loud before she was forced to roll under a strike that pulverized the ground. Her lights formed as she stood up. 5 lights forming into blades that whizzed around her enemy, scoring cuts as she dodged. It was like playing tag, but not fun and very stressful. Purple formed into a large shield, weathering blows that she couldn't avoid. Each impact jolted her arms, and she gritted her teeth. The Namu grew back every wound she made. It just wouldn't die, even when its heart was gone. Todoroki was trying to help, but the ice was barely an obstacle for the monster. Todoroki still wasn't using his fucking fire, something she'd yell about later. Each time he stabbed it, though, he bought Akari valuable time. Tamura laughed when she cut off the stupid bird's head for the 10th time. That isn't going to work. The Namu can regenerate as much as it wants. With its quirk combination, you don't stand a chance. Oh, quirks. That made sense. She wasn't sure why her enemy was giving out information though, but she definitely wasn't going to complain. Red and orange formed into spears, stabbing through Namu's arms while her other colors linked into chains, wrapping around its legs. Aizawa-sensei, Akari yelled. He turned, assessing the situation in an instant. An erasure turned on the monster. The stab wounds in its arms stopped healing, and Akari immediately attacked in a whirlwind of rainbow blades in a desperate effort. The Namu fell to the ground without its limbs, head, or heart like the mess it was. Akari's blades flew back to her, hovering, and she drew a long breath with no monster chasing her. The Namu, finally, didn't get up. You cheaters. Tamura ceased and sprinted towards Aizawa. The man whirled, capture scarf wrapping around the man-child, only for the scarf to disintegrate into nothing. Aizawa's eyes widened as he ducked under the lethal hands, aiming careful kicks to avoid becoming dust. Some of the remnants of the scarf fell as they fought, a bit blowing into Aizawa's eyes, and he blinked. And a familiar crunch reached Akari's ears. Of fucking course. The Namu stood, fully healed, ready to continue its previous order. What was it going to take to kill that freak show? Its regeneration kicked in after it was definitely dead. An erasure would have taken care of any revival quirks, meaning they'd have to completely eradicate the thing. And Akari wasn't strong enough to do that, but she knew who could. Izuku wrinkled his nose as the water flowed away to leave his ruined enemy. He'd been lucky to never smell burning flesh before. It really was rotten. All for One broke himself and came back together whole once again, standing up, several quirk combinations already set. He hadn't even bothered to repair the suit this time. Atlas, was it? I thought you were a hero. All for One mused. In my 200 years, I've never seen a proclaimed hero that was this violent. Stabbing, lethal amounts of impact, electrification. Really, it's a wonder I missed a monster like you 5 years ago. Izuku rolled his eyes. You're clearly still fine, so it's not like I've overestimated you. And why would I hold back on an enemy like this? Then again, you are quirkless. Izuku stilled. What? All for One laughed. You thought I didn't notice. I can't sense any quirk inside of you, despite the impressive amount of mana you have. But if you don't have one for all, how are you this strong? I guess I'll just have to pull the truth from your dead body. All for One sighed. The villain was getting ready to kill Izuku, meaning he thought he had seen everything he had to offer. For someone so smart, All for One really was an idiot. Izuku activated Void, and his mana flowed into the air, stitching itself into space. He had no access to magic now, The Quirk combination All For One was about to use was offensive, enhancement magic flooding into quirks Izuku couldn't recognize. The rest of his quirks were affecting his eyes and brain to keep up with Izuku's speed. All For One smirked. I know you're still holding back some of that strength. It's hard to tell with how brutal you fight, but you have the same problem as that blonde oaf. We're still too close to the students, aren't we? Izuku charged. The sound barrier broke as soon as he took a step, the ground starting to break behind him, air whistling past him so fast it stood still. Walking like this made him feel like he had been running for days. But Izuku still pushed himself into a sprint. He gripped his staff harder, an anchoring weight in a silent world. All For One was still moving, mental and reflex quirks stacking on top of each other to bring the human to incredible heights. The quirk combination activated as Izuku approached. Hundreds of swords formed into existence in front of him, hanging for an instant like a wall before the telekinesis kicked in with a red outline. They launched forward in a deadly maze of metal. The weapons couldn't fly nearly fast enough to catch up though. Izuku weaved through them gracefully, his cloak protecting him from the few glancing blows as his staff spun, flicking away the last few blades aimed straight for his heart. The magnetism was less expected, forcing Izuku to tightly grip his staff before he lost it and duck under the storm of blades returning like boomerangs. One scored a cut on his temple, a light prick that could have been much worse. All For One's left hand broke off his body, his arm turning into a spring. Izuku's fist slammed the palm aside. All For One tried to activate Overhaul in triumph, only for nothing to happen. After all, how could he focus on a biological process when they were moving that fast? All For One's mistake cost him 10 strikes slamming into his chest in a single breath. His other hand turned into a massive drill, and Izuku sidestepped to land a crushing kick that shattered it, rendering the arm useless. Then every bit of All For One's energy focused into a single quirk. Izuku was forced to stop moving as something pressed him down, the world returning to sound and perception. His feet dug into the ground like someone had put a huge weight on his back. Yet he couldn't feel anything there. All For One was breathing hard, finally able to activate Overhaul with visible relief. Yet Izuku couldn't move from whatever quirk had been used on him, his tired muscles aching further. The bastard turned up the fucking gravity. That quirk didn't even make sense. Like that, hero? All For One mocked, clearly glad that they had slowed down from supersonic speeds. Even someone that powerful can't handle that much gravity for very long. Your insides are going to collapse as you're crushed. Izuku stood up fully, and All For One was finally struck speechless. Izuku rolled back his sore shoulders. Finally, you shut up. That was nothing compared to the weight of the sky. Void deactivated, Mana rushing back to the strongest hero. Before the villain could move, a huge purple fist uppercut him into the clouds, and All For One soared high above the unforeseen simulation joint. Far, far away from Izuku's students, the ones this man was trying to kill. Stance 9, Onslaught. In the air, there was nothing All For One could do to defend himself from the vicious combo. Purple platforms let Izuku strike past him again and again like an angry ping-pong ball as his trusty staff hit thousands of times, pushing Overhaul's instant recovery to its limits. A familiar flash of mana lit up near the gate. So his daughter had a plan. Who was Izuku to object? Izuku's next strike sent All For One hurtling towards the ground like a meteor, hitting the ground with a mighty crash near where they had started. The man slowly pushed himself to his feet, swaying. The businessman mask was completely gone now, Overhaul and regeneration struggling to repair his broken body as he glared, burning with anger. All For One raised his arm for a final attack, quirk surging, before cutting off completely like a dead car. The villain looked at his hand, confused before a giant form landed on his head and knocked him to the ground. The Namu lay sprawled on top of All For One's totally ruined suit as they laid in a pile of limbs. And All For One's face finally twisted into fear as he realized a certain underground teacher just rendered them both powerless. Dad, now. Izuku's remaining mana flooded into his staff, glowing so bright that the purple lit up his eyes. He pulled the weapon back so that it was parallel to the ground, lined up directly with his targets. Stance 3. Izuku stabbed forward. Every single bit of his force focused into the small base of the reinforced staff in a single lethal thrust. Pierce. The air shattered around the staff in a horizontal tornado of power as everything hundreds of meters in front of him was erased. The ground wasn't spared. The eviscerated earth was left in a giant trench, extending out in a straight line. There wasn't a single trace of All For One or the Namu. Students and villains alike stared at the destruction brought with one move with a mix of awe and absolute terror. Even Tamura was frozen in shock, letting Eraserhead knock him out. Izuku's trusty staff slid onto his back as the strongest hero turned to face the remaining villains. So, who wants to surrender? Tsukachi Naomasa waited till Atlas was comfortably seated in the meeting room before he began. If he was being honest, the detective had been quite curious of the hero ever since he appeared out of nowhere a few months back. There were many new heroes after the drift, people who now had stronger abilities and wanted to fight villains. Atlas, though, was something unique. From the clips he'd seen, the man was overwhelmingly strong, finishing most of his fights with a single hit in perfect control. And then there was his fight with Overhaul. First, some basic questions I'm required to ask. What's your name? This part of the protocol was usually seen as useless since the answers were already in the file. But with Tsukachi's quirk, they became a possible piece of evidence. Midoriya Izuku. Atlas responded. Age, 40. Tsukachi's quirk went off, a sharp ping in his brain. People lied about their age constantly, but never in a police report. He glanced at the file, which for some reason also indicated that Midoriya Izuku was 40. Blood type? Tsukachi asked, hiding his reaction. Though, quirk, Titan. Another ping, this time a lot more concerning. Why was the pro hero lying about their quirk? Atlas's quirk was known to be a powerful mutant enhancer, powerful but simple. Was there some secret part to it? At this point, Tsukachi would have told the witness about his quirk, lie detector. But this time the detective didn't. There was clearly something going on here. Despite that, Atlas seemed like a pleasant man, kind and curious. The hero was surprisingly a big fan of detectives. Usually, it was the other way around. Then he told him what happened in the USJ. And Tsukachi's blood turned to ice. All for One, apparently alive and healed, had attacked with his successor, a warper, a small army, and a Namu. The calm malice, manipulation, and of course the many quirks matched up with the terrible evil from so long ago. And then Atlas eliminated him and his monster with ease, something that even All Might in his prime couldn't do. Not to mention that every villain, including the warper and successor, had been captured. Toshinori had told him, of course, about his spar with Atlas, and Tsukachi hadn't really believed him. How could a new hero best the symbol of peace? His longtime friend must have been exaggerating. Tsukachi had clearly been wrong. Atlas spoke about his battle with the most powerful villain ever like a game. The fight had been exciting, especially seeing all the interesting abilities the man had. Overhaul had been irritating, but made everything riskier, and therefore fun. But Tsukachi could see where Atlas went all out, not willing to endanger his students in the battle. The detective was hesitant to believe All for One was completely dead. Yet the ridiculous amount of destruction he could see from Atlas's final attack seemed to have done the job. And Tsukachi's quirk still hadn't triggered a single time the entire tale. A man came out of nowhere, powerful enough to destroy All for One with ease. Tsukachi could only stare down at the incorrect file after Atlas left, confused. Who, exactly, was Midoriya Izuku? Izuku dropped through the clouds, landing softly on the sidewalk, and the opening exposed the stars to the world below. Aurora flew down next to him. Her magic vanished in a flash of violet, and her hair sparkled in the streetlight. Earth restaurants were familiar, somewhere they'd gone together for centuries. A new atmosphere, instead of just eating in. Of course, there hadn't actually been any cooks there. This would be the first time they actually ate out since humanity came back. And the change was small yet jarring at the same time. There were now light conversations around them as they took their table. I wonder if you're ever going to get tired of eating that. Aurora mused as Izuku instinctively ordered katsudon. I was so worried I would. Izuku laughed. I think when the drift happened, I ate it almost every day. I remember that. It was kind of tedious, getting you the ingredients every day. But I did get some every Saturday, and well, human food is wonderful. Aurora slurped up her soba from the chopsticks, letting out a pleased hum. How she could still look so elegant while eating soba, Izuku had no clue. You know, I don't think you missed a single sad back then. Izuku realized how, looking back, the princess making every weekly meeting for centuries was pretty incredible. Aurora shrugged. It was guilt, at first, over me being abandoned. You didn't make that choice. No, but it was still us as a whole, heaven, that sent humanity away and left you behind. Izuku grinned. I certainly didn't mind those centuries alone with you. She continued like he hadn't spoken, cheeks tinted pink. The years before I moved in, especially. I can't even imagine what it was like to have absolutely no one. I could only show up once a week, so that's what I did. Izuku's teasing smile turned into something softer. Every Saturday I would stare out on the beach and wonder if you would come. It's what I had most to look forward to. After all, you were the only thing that changed in a silent world. I never really had to worry about food, so you didn't have to warp to that beach every week. But you did. Soon you were more to me than just the abandoned human. And in just half a century, I was in love with a dense dork. I wasn't that bad. Izuku protested, indignant even as his chest fluttered at the indirect confession. It took you literal years to realize that I did. I still remember that night the realization finally dawned. It was so adorable you were just like, huh. Aurora, please. Izuku's face was completely red now, and Aurora laughed. The sound was bright and warm, lighting up their little bubble, and Izuku couldn't do anything but stare into her purple eyes. I love you too, Aurora, Izuku murmured. She heard him, and her smile grew even wider. You two are so cute together, the waiter exclaimed as she brought Izuku's katsudon. How long have you two been married? Almost 700 years, Izuku answered cheerfully. The human paused for a moment before she chuckled, walked away, most likely taking it as a joke. It's been a really long time since then. We're pretty old now. Who ouch. Izuku winced as Aurora casually stomped on his foot under the table. She was wearing heels. We traveled so much those years, Aurora said. You know, we still haven't explored all of heaven yet. We could visit next time we both have a day off. Oh, like a date. Izuku's eyes lit up. Exactly like that. Yeah, just please don't beat anyone up this time. What? I would never do something like that, Izuku protested. Izuku, we're still banned from Kashima Village. Izuku paused. Okay, but that guy totally deserved it. Aurora rolled her eyes, like he couldn't see the fond smile on her face. The Thunder God lived up to his title a little too much. Izuku had finally got baby Akari to sleep when someone had decided to shake the sky with their magic for fun. So Izuku had asked him if he wanted to fight, and Kashima had arrogantly agreed. The fight didn't wreck much of the village, just the god's pride. Akari's with Iri and Kuro, right? I wonder how they're doing right now. Iri must be happy to spend more time with her sister. Yeah, they're at the dorms. Iri's completely fascinated with her new horn buddy, Izuku said. Horn buddy, Aurora repeated, confused. One of my students, Ashido, has 2 horns on her head, Izuku explained. They aren't really the same as Iri's, but, well, it's the concept that counts. That must be a mutation quirk, right? It's strange to get used to. We don't really have anything like horns on heaven. Also, her skin is pink and she shoots acid. What? Class 1 dressed a lot quicker now, Izuku noticed, compared to that first day of class almost a week ago. The class had gotten the day off after the USJ incident. No students had been hurt in the attack, and Eraserhead and 13 only ended up with light injuries. But that didn't change the fact that everything could have gone much worse. Despite being heroes in training, they were still children who had to fight off murderers to survive. The young students facing him seemed more serious now, with an actual desire to improve. The UA staff had made sure every student knew about the free counseling sessions, but only a few students seemed like they were considering it. Todoroki seemed stoic as ever, of course, and Akari was only angry that her little sister had been put in danger. Izuku brought himself out of his thoughts, clapping his hands. The low sound echoed in the monitoring room, cutting off any lingering conversations. Welcome back, everyone. Today's exercise will be more strategic, and I got a pretty big space reserved for it. The monitors flicked to life, glimpses of an entire fake city from countless angles. Hey, if the school was going to have a ridiculous budget, Izuku might as well make use of it. Atlas-sensei, this is where the entrance exam was conducted, was it not? Ida asked. Are we performing urban battles once more? Nope. Izuku ignored Katsuki's huff. Instead, we'll be playing tag. That sounds kinda fun, Kaminari exclaimed. Will we be chasing each other, Atlas-sensei? Yaoyorozu asked. Nope. Izuku grinned. You'll be chasing me. A pause. Then multiple voices started complaining at once. That's impossible, sensei, Shiro protested. Seeing you fight was like a Hawks video, Fuji added. We couldn't even see you move. How are we going to tag you? Not me, specifically, Izuku corrected, waving his hands in a totally unnecessary motion. On screen, a shape began to form, solidifying into a simple, human-like body. There were no features, like a mannequin, and he was as tall as Izuku. The figure waved a hand at the camera, his skin the bright purple of Izuku's mana, and the Uraraka gasped. Meet Cloudy, class. He's the one you'll be trying to catch today. Sensei, how are you doing this? I thought your magic was some kind of air manipulation, Hisui asked. Izuku blinked. I don't have any kind of elemental abilities. I only use reinforcement magic. What? But that doesn't make any, Yaoyorozu blurted, before covering her mouth, embarrassed at the outburst. That air manipulation you saw, Hisui. Purple unicorns floated into existence, flying around the monitoring room. That's just me reinforcing the air around me, and then changing its shape. Stuff like Izuku gestured at Cloudy. Them are the same thing, just really complex. Yaoyorozu was actually taking notes, her eyes wide. Where had she even gotten a note per write? Her quirk. But how are you reinforcing things that you aren't touching? Not to mention something so far away. Who says I'm not? Izuku smiled, not elaborating any further. Yaoyorozu glanced at the air clone, confused. Izuku turned back to the rest of the class. You'll be put into random groups of 4, then enter the city. There is a 5-minute planning period, after which you must capture the enemy by wrapping your capture tape around him. The exercise ends if your entire team is unconscious, or if you exceed the 30-minute time limit. Any questions? Katsuki didn't even bother to raise his hand. Can I kill the fucking thing? Akari snorted. Izuku raised an eyebrow. If you can destroy Cloudy, then yeah, that counts as a win. Katsuki slammed his gauntlets together, a savage grin on his face. Sir, is it really a good idea to randomize the groups? Ida asked. There's no way to know who you're going to be working with in the field. Random teams will set you up for that. Ida bowed low. I apologize for questioning you, sensei. You really don't need to bow to me. Izuku turned to the screen, letting 4 names flash. First group, Bakugo, Tokoyami, Kaminari, and Ada. On second thought, he definitely should have picked the teams. Thought highs would be a great learning experience for the students. And pretty funny to watch, too. They totally had this in the bag, in Kaminari Denki's humble opinion. Bakugo and Ada were both on his team. They had been so cool when they fought on the first day, moving so fast that Kaminari could barely see them. It was like an action movie. Tokoyami had a strong quirk too, some kind of shadow demon. All these opus quirks combined with Kaminari's electrification, and they were set. Ada stepped forward to take charge, pushing up his glasses. We cannot underestimate this opponent. We shoo. Huh? Katsuki interrupted. Who died and made you king? Fucking 4 eyes. Ada sputtered. How rude. And for your information, I am the vice representative. I don't give a shit. Here's a plan. Angry red eyes glared at the 3 of them. Stay the hell out of my way. Kaminari couldn't help but ask. But Bakugo isn't this like a team thing? Shut up, Pikachu. I'll beat that purple thing all by myself. With that, Bakugo stormed off into the city, his palms sparkling. A loud timer sounded, signaling the early end of their planning time. Ada was frozen for a few moments before dashing after him, leaving their remaining 2 teammates alone. What a mad banquet of darkness, Tokoyami muttered. Kaminari had no clue what he just said, but he agreed. It seems that Bakugo isn't going to be working with us, Ada said when they caught up, his jaw clenched. Damn, no honorifics. Ada might as well have cussed. We'll need to work around him. That replica is but a pale imitation of the real threat. While our foe is contending with the flames of wrath, we can force it to yield with our combined strength. Tokoyami said. What? Dark Shadow laughed. The looks on your faces. Fumi here's a chunny, you see. He means that he wants to attack the air clone while it's busy with the hothead, or something. Oh, that sounds good. Kaminari gave the shadow creature a thumbs up. This class really had some interesting personalities. That only made it more fun to get to know them, though. Ada nodded. Simple and effective. We wait for the perfect moment, and Katsuki flew above the buildings, explosions from his hands and fire from his feet propelling him forward. He'd been waiting for a chance to fight, training harder than before ever since those bastards had attacked the USJ. Now he had a chance to test that out. Katsuki's eyes scanned the fake city from his aerial view. He'd picked the most likely path for the fake Deku to appear, a straight path from where they'd started. This wasn't hide and seek, so the target should be easy to spot. And then Katsuki did. A bright purple completely exposed against the dull gray buildings. Gotcha. Katsuki grinned, sharply changing direction with a twist of his body. He blasted towards the clone, palm outstretched. Die. Cloudy backflipped, landing smoothly on the next building over as Katsuki smashed through the rooftop. Katsuki reversed his momentum, feet flaring like thrusters as he flew back at his opponent. Cloudy sidestepped the punch, grabbing Katsuki's arm in an iron grip. Before he knew it, the world turned on his head, and he was slammed down with a painful thump. The fucking nerve. Katsuki reacted immediately, mana flowing into his legs as he aimed at Cloudy's ankles. The bastard leaped up to avoid the attack, blocking Katsuki's next kick. A purple forearm took Katsuki's explosion-enhanced elbow like it was nothing. Cloudy punched forward and Katsuki ducked in, getting close enough for both of his palms to hit the clone's head. Go to hell. Compressed bomb. A huge boom almost covered his yell, and smoke filled the rooftop. A lethal technique created solely for monsters. A point-blank explosion between his hands. Katsuki readied another explosion, ready to finish the clone off. The smoke cleared to reveal a cracked building, no opponent in sight. Where? A kick hit him hard in the back, making him hiss. Katsuki's reflexes kicked in and he swung behind him. The counter missed as Cloudy jumped back a safe distance, watching. Katsuki clenched his fist. His explosions affected the thing, dealing knockback. But Cloudy was super durable and could hit back strong. Not even a scratch had remained from his point-blank attack. On the other hand, he was moving at only above average speeds, instead of the insane shit that the white-haired bastard did. That meant Katsuki could still land hits. Cloudy suddenly turned and sprinted away, skipping across the rooftops. Katsuki froze, before running in pursuit. Shit, Cloudy had no reason to fight him, did he? All the purple fucker had to do was run, and Katsuki would lose. Get back here, damn it, Katsuki shouted. Cloudy wasn't too fast, and with Katsuki's speed he could catch up to him easily. But Cloudy was skilled, weaving through explosions and flames and dodging every attack he threw at him. That white-haired bastard was controlling him, wasn't he? The reflexes on the thing were irritating. Cloudy met his palm strike with one of his own, and the sweat ignited harmlessly in his purple hand. At the same time, his knee nearly cracked Katsuki's chin, and the opening let him get away again. The counterattacks were the biggest problem. If he wasn't careful, that shit was going to knock him out. Katsuki needed to corner him somewhere. Katsuki's leg swung in an arc, a blade of flame slicing through the air. Cloudy changed direction as the roof in front of him was destroyed, vaulting over the sudden fire. An explosion wrecked a building a few minutes later, keeping him moving in the same direction. Katsuki kept up his small explosions and fireballs as he herded the pest, keeping up the pressure. Actually hitting Cloudy was almost impossible though, the clone running gracefully over ledges and rolling under obstacles. If Katsuki wasn't so annoyed, he'd probably be impressed at Deku's Parker. The debris everywhere from Katsuki's attacks had become weapons. Anything was a lethal attack when launched with an explosion. Rocks and pipes had become unwilling projectiles, shattering against his purple enemy. Finally, Cloudy approached his cage, a ridiculously tall building marking the center of the city. In there, Katsuki could let loose, with no way for Cloudy to dodge in the confined space and bring the entire thing down. He blasted forward at top speed and Cloudy whirled around, arms lifting to block a punch, only for Katsuki to feint into a dropkick, striking him full in the chest and sending the clone flying towards the skyscraper. Suddenly, Cloudy twisted in midair and planted both feet on the side of the building. Instead of falling, the clone kept moving, running straight up as windows cracked below him. The fuck? Reinforced air, Deku had said, molded into a solid human, and running around with perfect agility. Of course, it wasn't affected by gravity. That would be too easy, wouldn't it? Damn, Bakugo's strong, Kaminari-sen exclaimed, watching the blonde unleash pure destruction with his quirk and magic, chasing after Cloudy. Despite the wrecked building, the clone was still getting away, defying physics as it leaped between falling debris. It was even running faster than Ida without his recipro. But how are we going to get up there, Ada? Unfortunately, the rest of them couldn't fly or run up buildings. Ada only stared up at the skyscraper, speechless. Impossible. Had Bakugo really gotten that much stronger in such a short time? Or had the blonde just been holding back when they fought? Cloudy grabbed onto the ledge, flipping himself onto the roof of the building. Big mistake. Katsuki soared up right behind him, rising higher with a fierce grin on his face. On the roof of the skyscraper, there was nowhere for Cloudy to run. All the clone could do was watch as Katsuki pulled out his trump card. Katsuki stopped, now far above the clone, hovering in place. Then he fell like a meteor, spinning faster and faster, explosions twisting the smoke around him in a spiral as a trail of flame pushed him even faster. Howitzer! Katsuki broke out of his spin at the last moment, palm crackling with an explosion from all of his momentum. Impact! The blast was deafening, a sharp pain against his ears as the rooftop crumbled below him. Katsuki winced as the knockback hit his wrists. Fuck, that hurt. The heat left in a rush, bristling against Katsuki's skin. The shockwave knocked Cloudy high into the air, and the clone plummeted down, unmoving as the air rushed past his body. He slammed into the street, the crash inaudible to Katsuki's ringing ears as he landed nearby, explosions slowing his descent. Did that do it? Cloudy was embedded in the concrete, stunned. The only damage from the massive explosion and resulting fall were thin cracks in the dust covering his body. Katsuki made his exhausted body move, dashing towards his fallen opponent with his capture tape. A purple fist suddenly shot out, catching him in the gut. The breath was fucking pushed out of him as he tumbled across the street, coming to a stop. Cloudy stood up, slower than before but moving nonetheless. Despite the fact that his enemy had no eyes, Katsuki just knew the fucker was looking down on him as he forced himself to his feet, panting. He could keep going, he wasn't done yet. Now, attack! An annoying voice shouted, somewhere to his side. Fuck, he'd completely forgotten about those idiots. Cloudy's arm shot behind him, catching a kick from Glasses. Glasses' other leg slammed into Cloudy's ankle, putting the clone off balance. The armored boy rushed in to keep up his attack, but this time Cloudy sidestepped and he tripped. Dark Shadow lunged, pinning Cloudy to the ground. Katsuki used the chance to fire off an explosion, but the clone was unfazed. The shitty Shadow Demon, though, was very scared of the explosion for some reason, leaping back to Bird Brain. The now free air clone had no problem fending off Glasses and Katsuki. The damn engine kid was getting in Katsuki's way, and it was so fucking frustrating, his missed kicks jabbing at Katsuki's strained arms as they jostled each other. Their styles didn't match up at all, and they were doing more damage to each other than Cloudy. Fuck off, engines, Bird Brain, Katsuki shouted. I have this covered. Takoyami tilted his head, glancing at the ruined landscape. It does not seem to be so, Bakugo. Shut up. Dark Shadow's next rush completely missed, making Glasses trip and face plant into the concrete. This would usually be hilarious, but the opening let Cloudy land another punch on Katsuki's chest that ached like hell. Dark Shadow moved to attack again, but Katsuki's next kick made him flinch back. Was he afraid of the light? The thing that Katsuki, with his explosions and flames, made constantly. The sentient Quirk nudged Glasses off balance as it suddenly drew back, making him stumble. When Cloudy ducked, Katsuki's foot slammed into Glasses' weird helmet. Now that was satisfying. Bakugo, Glasses yelled as the blow knocked him to the ground. If he could see his face, the idiot would probably be glaring at him. Heh. Katsuki threw another punch, battering against Cloudy's arms. Then something crackled, but the sound wasn't not coming from Katsuki's palms. Oh, indiscriminate shock. 1.3 million volts. The Kachu screamed. Fuck. Electricity streaked across the street, enveloping up the entire area in a single attack. Cloudy just leaped straight up, avoiding it completely. Katsuki pushed himself off the ground as well, but he wasn't fast enough. His legs took the brunt of the charge, an extremely painful jolt that made him bite his tongue as he fell to his knees. Birdbrain's eyes went wide as he was zapped, dark shadow retreating completely into him from the bright yellow light. Glasses was the worst off. Metal armor was an excellent conductor. He screamed, and Katsuki almost felt bad for him. Dunce face, the absolute dumbass, had fried his brain with that single attack. He slumped to the ground, unconscious, and the other two idiots followed. Katsuki forced himself to stay awake, legs unresponsive. He fired off a final explosion that rolled harmlessly off the purple bastard's head before his vision went black. The monitoring room stared at the screens, stunned at the absolute trainwreck they'd just witnessed. Saw that was a pretty good example of what not to do. A thin strand of mana, invisible to the inexperienced humans in the room, was connected to Izuku's palm like a wire. It ran out of the monitoring room, through the hallways, and into the fake city. Air clones were something he'd worked out with Loki, modeled after her abilities. They weren't as good as Loki's clones. They were actual beings that could think and function, while Izuku's were more like drones. Still, the advantage of numbers was undeniable. Cloudy was effectively just manipulated mana. To work long range, Izuku needed a camera set up on Cloudy's forehead to see what was happening. What do you think that the first team did wrong? Izuku asked. He would have liked to go over it while the team was here, but somehow, all of them had ended up unconscious. Yaoyorozu's hand shot up. This exercise is based on teamwork, correct? Team 1 seemed to struggle with that. Jiru snorted. Bakugo-san abandoned his team at the start, and while Ida tried to lead the remaining members, his plan was too simple and directly clashed with Bakugo. Neither of them could fight in a team. And Kaminari-san messed up pretty bad at the end, Kiro Asui said bluntly. Izuku hummed. That's all true, but what about Takoyami? What could he have done better? Yaoyorozu wavered. I thought Takoyami did well in the exercise. He listened to his teammates and carried out the plan. Dark shadow is weak to light, Izuku explained. Being on a team with Bakugo was terrible luck for him. Yet Takoyami never told his teammates about that. As a result, Dark Shadow couldn't function well. Of course, Bakugo didn't even plan with them, but Kaminari's quirk produces light as well. Fighting with someone means that you cover for their weaknesses, not just work with their strengths. Atlas Sensei was pretty cool back there, Kirishima Ejiro exclaimed. Teamwork was so manly. If the four of us work together, we can totally beat this exercise. We get 5 minutes to plan, right? Anjiro said. Can't believe that the first team wasted that. Sue tilted her head in thought. From what we saw, I doubt we can knock Cloudy out. He seems super durable, Kiro. To win, we'll need to use the capture tape. Our quirks are both good for capture, right Sue? Call me Sue. Sue interrupted. Sue, Zero corrected. If Kirishima and Ajiro hold Cloudy off, the two of us can wrap him up. From there, we just need to get the capture tape around him. We can't afford to underestimate Cloudy, though. The skill he showed against Bakugo was still incredible, Ajiro noted. Cloudy's body looked like some kind of purple stone, strong enough to tank a giant explosion with ease. Would his hardening be enough? Izuku's phone connected to the camera on Cloudy's head. He reinforced Cloudy's body, fixing up the minor damage Katsuki left, before making the clone stand up. It was oddly similar to playing a video game, just with a very difficult controller. It had taken a lot of practice to make complex movements with Cloudy, moving each part of his body precisely. Now Izuku could control the clone easily, even from this far away, to the point that Cloudy was like an extra limb. The planning period ended, and Cloudy took off in a sprint. Izuku decided to run through the streets, this time keeping off the rooftops. The camera on Cloudy's forehead was holding up well, and the empty streets came through in perfect quality despite the fast pace. He'd have to thank Power Loader for helping with that, again. Minutes passed, yet strangely, nothing happened. The student should have attacked by now. He was in plain view, yet he hadn't seen a single one. Asui, Kirishima, Zero, and Ajiro. They didn't seem like the kind of group to slack off an exercise, so they must have a plan of some kind. Cloudy twisted his head side to side as he ran, scanning his surroundings. He didn't need to go looking for the students. He would win if he just kept running till the exercise ended. There was some kind of resistance as Cloudy moved, barely noticeable. Was Izuku not using enough mana? Cloudy glanced down, only to see many white stripes wrapped around his legs. He must have been running for several minutes, only getting progressively tangled without even noticing. Cloudy's only had two senses, the vision and audio coming from the camera. Izuku couldn't detect the additional weight of something as light as tape. Now, someone yelled behind him. Zero. Cloudy was suddenly flying backward, and his head dragged across the concrete. Cloudy turned just in time to block a thick tail, knocking him off balance. Before he could counter, something pink wrapped around his arms, keeping them in place as Kirishima leaped forward, his capture tape in hand. All of Cloudy's limbs had been immobilized with quick work from Zero and Asui, Izuku noted. Anjiro had set up the perfect chance for Kirishima to capture the enemy. An impressive show of teamwork from the start. Absolutely nothing like the first team. Izuku couldn't make it too easy for them, though. Cloudy leaned backward, unnaturally so for a human. Kirishima's grin vanished as he missed, and Cloudy's wrapped legs hit his head in an uppercut. He hadn't hardened his face, sloppy. Cloudy used the motion to flip back, landing away from the four awkwardly, like some kind of purple burrito. Kirishima smiled in excitement, hardening his fists. Asui said something that was muffled by her tongue. Ajiro was in a karate-like stance, and Zero still had his arms out, keeping Cloudy contained. Cloudy swung his foot forward, yanking the tape and by extension, Zero towards him. His other leg slammed into the boy's side, and Zero tumbled across the street. He moved towards Asui next, to break her grip on his arms. Red Gauntlet, Kirishima shouted, and a hardened fist drove straight into Cloudy's gut, making him bend from the impact. Ajiro followed up with a leg sweep, knocking Cloudy to the ground. Cloudy reacted instantly as he fell, rolling to the side. He aimed a kick at Ajiro as he stood up, only for Kirishima to proudly step forward and tank the blow. Thanks, Kirishima. Ajiro used the opening to attack, and his tail swung in a fluid arc. Anytime, bro. Kirishima yelled back as his rock-like arms blocked Cloudy's next kick. The three fought together well, with Kirishima stopping Cloudy's kicks while Ajiro pressed the attack. Asui's tongue was still tightly wrapped around Cloudy's arms, not letting him get far or throw any punches. He was worried about damaging her tongue at first, but it seemed to be durable. Ajiro was well-trained, smoothly flowing into blow after blow. He was obviously dedicated to karate, and his mutation made it into something unique. His tail functioned like an extra arm, yet it had even more flexibility and range. Most interesting, though, was the red mana tinting his limbs before every strike. Basic enhancement magic. Kirishima was a brawler, swinging his fists without any type of martial art. There was talent, though, and his quirk could be amazing in hand-to-hand combat. From what Izuku could tell, his upper body was entirely hardened at the moment, holding strong even as the fight stretched on. If Zero recovered fast enough to help them, Cloudy would probably be captured. The issue with their approach, though, was that it only worked because Asui was behind him. With Asui holding him from the back, Ajiro and Kirishima were free to pressure him without getting in the way of her tongue. Cloudy sidestepped Ajiro's tail, letting it crack the concrete next to him, and twisted into a low roundhouse kick. Kirishima stepped in front of it, abruptly realizing that his legs weren't hardened as Cloudy's leg struck his shin. The redhead toppled to the ground, and Izuku heard several of his students hiss in sympathy. Ajiro was now left standing between Asui and Cloudy, and she was forced to let go of the clone. Cloudy used this chance to turn and sprint away in the other direction, purple footsteps ringing through the fake city as Ajiro cursed behind him. There were only a few minutes left on the timer, after all. Ajiro was close behind him, using his enhancement to push his legs further. He was panting, but still closing the distance. "You're not going anywhere, Kiro." Asui swung around, as her long tongue wrapped around a streetlight, before landing a powerful dropkick that whipped Cloudy's head to the side. She landed in a crouch, and Cloudy ducked as her tongue punched past his head. Cloudy took her by surprise by picking Asui up by the shoulders and tossing her at Ajiro, forcing the poor boy to stop running and catch her. That should hold those two. Now where was? Improvised move, red slingshot. Cloudy turned just in time to see a massive amount of tape between two poles, pulled taut with Kirishima at its center. With a yell, the boy slammed into the clone like a missile. Zero's tape lashed out as soon as they hit the ground, sticking them in place as Asui wrapped the capture binding around Cloudy's body. The rest of Class 1 cheered behind Izuku as the second team won as the four of them stood Cloudy, tired yet victorious. The cameras picked up them walking back together, Zero complaining about history elbows. He hadn't expected that last move or that 20-year-olds could adapt that well. Izuku smiled. It seemed that whether they were humans or gods, his students always managed to surprise him. Next team, Izuku called out. Aoyama, Yaoyorozu, Jiru, and Hagakure. Yaoyorozu Momo was up next, and she was quite nervous about it. After getting the chance to learn magic for 5 years, she returned from her impromptu vacation to fulfill her dream of being a hero. Despite what her parents had said, she passed the recommendation exam and got into UA University, one of the best hero schools in the country, and she couldn't be more excited about it. She had even got elected class president. Once Yaoyorozu was here, though, something started to change. She worked hard to get this far, mastering her difficult quirk, fighting the best trainers. Yet most of her classmates seemed to be leagues ahead of her. Bakugo's combat ability was incredible. He almost took on Cloudy completely on his own. Todoroki's quirk was ridiculously powerful. And then there was Midoriya, the girl who protected the entire class while all Yaoyorozu could do was watch, terrified of the monster. Creation was cool, but did she have the power to match up to the rest of them? Yeah, Momo, you okay? Yaoyorozu was jolted out of her thoughts as a gloved hand waved in front of her face. You were kinda staring into space there. Yes, I'm fine, Hagakure-san. Did you just call me Momo? Yep, Hagakure replied brightly. Mina thought of it this morning. It's pretty cute, right? Yaoyorozu blinked. Was that a nickname? She'd never been given one of those before. You have an idea for this exercise, please? He reviewed the other two teams and their plans pretty well. Jiru asked. She loved analysis, so she'd been happy to go over the fights she saw in the monitoring room. Looking back, she might have come off as prideful or blunt when detailing their mistakes. Maybe she needed to apologize to them. Yaoyorozu forced herself to focus. All of that wasn't important right now. She needed a plan. Creation gave her a lot of options, including capture. Yaoyorozu was certain that Jiru's quirk gave her a better sense of hearing, something invaluable for capturing a target. Aoyama's naval laser would be the perfect sniper, and the invisible Hagakure could set the perfect ambush. The biggest issue they faced was that they lacked firepower. They probably couldn't take out Cloudy with sheer force and precision like the second team did, but maybe their team could do something different. It seems that our Magnifique leader has thought of a plan, Aoyama noted. I think though it's more of a strategy. Yaoyorozu made 4 earpieces as she talked, handing one to each team member. Hagakure-san, your quirk and magic are light-related, right? She looked at where she assumed Hagakure's eyes were, but it was nearly impossible to tell. One of Hagakure's floating gloves lifted, and a small sphere of white formed on the palm. When her hand moved, the light drifted with it. Yeah, why? Do you think you could manipulate Aoyama's lasers? Yaoyorozu asked. Hagakure hummed. I'm not too sure if I can with my magic, but with invisibility. Definitely. With my quirk, I'll be able to boost all of your attacks. From there, we're going to wear Cloudy down until we have a chance to capture him, Hagakure-san. That'll most likely be your job. Sure. What's my task, Mademoiselle Yaoyorozu? Aoyama asked. We'll be splitting up into 2 groups. Could you stay with Hagakure? Her abilities would be perfect for strengthening and redirecting your lasers. Aoyama beamed. A chance to show off my beautiful quirk to its fullest extent. Wonderful. Wait, we're pairing off. Jiru asked. Are you sure that's a good idea against someone this strong? The goal of this exercise is to catch Cloudy, instead of a straight-up fight, Yaoyorozu said. Chasing him with 2 groups is the best option. When we force him to stop running, though, we take him on with all 4 of us. Jiru's ear jacks plugged into the ground, and the purple-haired girl closed her eyes in concentration. She listened for a few more moments before opening them again. He's up ahead, running straight through the street, Jiru said. Yaoyorozu nodded, pressed against the other wall of the alley. Just a few minutes had passed, and Jiru had already found Cloudy. Her quirk was amazing. How long till he passes us? Yaoyorozu asked. She let her formulas come to the front of her brain, and her quirk tickled her stomach. A few seconds no. A purple blur ran past their little alley. Yaoyorozu unzipped the back of her costume, imagining the metal and gunpowder and the exact structures she needed there. She stepped out onto the street as the creation finished, pulling the contraption from her exposed skin and setting it onto the concrete. Holy shit, Jiru breathed. Did you just pull out a fucking cannon from your back? Cover your ears, Yaoyorozu warned in response, though she couldn't help the smile on her face. Jiru did so just in time, and a shattering boom launched the cannonball at incredible velocity towards the escaping clone. Usually, of course, artillery is a terrible choice for an ambush. Ridiculously loud. Not to mention heavy and inconvenient. However, Cloudy was essentially deaf. The mana construct, though impressive, was only hearing through a camera. The projectile slammed straight into Cloudy's back with a crack, and the impact carried the clone forward into a nearby building. Jiru's jacks plugged into her legs, and she fired off a vibrational blast into the unstable foundation. The concrete tumbled down, covering Cloudy completely. He burst out of his coffin just a moment later, and rocks were thrown to the side with frightening ease. Yaoyorozu immediately fired again, but the cannonball flew past the clone's head as he dodged, tearing through the street. Another wave of sound clipped Cloudy's legs, giving Yaoyorozu an opening. A steel katana formed out of her shoulder, her hand closing around the simple handle, and she swung the blade in the same movement. Cloudy simply raised an arm and the sword stopped short, barely making a dent. Atlas Sensei had said Cloudy was made out of the air. Yet the purple, stone-like clone was durable enough to take a cannon shot like it was nothing, and her katana couldn't even slice his body. Cloudy seemed to switch strategies as they pressured him, counter-attacking to force them to back off instead of merely running away. Her katana chipped against his arms as they fought, dealing little damage and barely deflecting Cloudy's attacks. His blows were held back, but still heavy and fast enough that she couldn't afford to lose concentration. Meanwhile, Jiru supported her from a distance, taking shots at Cloudy whenever she could. Yaoyorozu sidestepped a punch, forming a boot around her shoe for a metal kick that struck the clone in the chest, knocking him back. She used the breather to make her staff, making wide, controlled swings. She created more and more weapons, daggers and gauntlets and grenades to force him towards Jiru-san. Earjack stabbed near Cloudy's feet, and a shockwave wrecked the ground below. He tripped, vulnerable, and Yaoyorozu pulled a massive greatsword out her back, making the edge as sharp as she could. Her tired arms protested under the weight as she struck down with all of her might. Cloudy rolled to the side and the sword dug itself into concrete. He moved before she could recover, his purple fist striking her exposed stomach hard enough to make her stumble backward. He was even stronger than she expected. She needed a new plan, something to create. Yaoyorozu's eyes went wide, creating a metal shield just in time for another punch to slam into it. The impact knocked her down, her mind scrambling to think. Cloudy's head suddenly whipped to the side from a burst of sound. Jiru plugged her jacks into her arms, and the vibrational jolt of a punch at short range was almost concussive. She used the opening to get Yaoyorozu out of the way, and instead of continuing the fight, the powerful clone escaped down the street. He was out of sight within moments. Jiru held out a hand and Yaoyorozu took it gratefully, panting as she was pulled onto her feet. "You okay, please? Took a pretty bad hit there." "Yes, I'm fine. We should get moving. He shouldn't have gotten far." Jiru blinked. "What? We just tried taking him on ourselves. It clearly didn't work out. We got a lot of information, though." Yaoyorozu brightened. "Our attacks affect him. He's just very durable. His vision is limited, just as I thought. And your quirk works quite well despite Cloudy being deaf." Jiru shrugged. "I don't need to hold back on the vibration since Cloudy isn't human. So, what now? For our next ambush." Another bright blue beam struck Cloudy's side, and the clone stumbled. Aoyama posed from a distance, a shining sniper firing laser after laser. His quirk had its limit, but with stomach medication on hand, that limit was much higher. Hagakure had ditched her gloves, going for a capture whenever she had the chance. Cloudy couldn't see, hear, or even feel the girl, but since the capture tape became visible when she took it out of her hair, his reflexes were enough to keep getting away. She lacked experience from what Yaoyorozu could tell, but her invisibility was hard to counter and Aoyama was making more and more openings for her. 15 minutes had passed, and Yaoyorozu was starting to see the results of their strategy. Repeated attacks and guerrilla warfare were getting to the clone, thin lines of damage visible on his purple body. With Cloudy running away from Aoyama and Hagakure, it was the perfect time for Yaoyorozu and Jiru to cut him off from the front. Yaoyorozu leaped out in front of him, activating her little reinforcement magic. She swung her reinforced staff down, and the metal connected with his shoulder. A white ball appeared behind him, seeming to float before the magic struck Cloudy's legs. Hagakure pulled out her capture tape, starting to loop it around his arm. Cloudy twisted away at the last moment, knocking heads with the invisible girl in the process. Jiru's jacks stabbed into Cloudy's camera, but they didn't seem to do any damage to it. "Oh, Hagakure, are you okay?" Yaoyorozu asked, worried. "Did she get a concussion from that?" "Yeah, I'm fine. That hurt a lot, though." Hagakure made another light sphere as she talked, punching Cloudy in the face. At the same time, one of Aoyama's lasers struck the back of his head. Yet Cloudy was barely phased. How could a clone even be this durable? Cloudy caught the end of Yaoyorozu's staff, yanking it out of her grip. It twirled between the clone's purple fingers, lazily spinning in a wheel. Yaoyorozu's eyes went wide. She'd never considered that someone could take one of her weapons before, and then use them better than she could. The gray metal blurred into motion, somehow deflecting a vibrational blast. The weapon swung in a perfect circle around Cloudy, and there was an audible crack as it knocked Hagakure down. Yaoyorozu barely had the time to form a new staff before Cloudy attacked, and the blunt end was stopped inches from her face. The way Cloudy used the staff was nothing like she did. It was graceful and precise, every part of the weapon jabbing and swinging in perfect balance. It was almost like it was an extension of himself. Cloudy batted away a poke at his head, launching another 2 attacks that she barely blocked. She didn't see the low arc that swept her off her feet and Yaoyorozu's back hit the ground, leaving her winded. The clone sprinted towards Aoyama, the only team member left standing. He weaved through the array of lasers effortlessly, getting closer and closer to the boy. Aoyama panicked, firing off a massive blue beam, only for the clone to duck under it. The attack flew past Cloudy and into something invisible before the light was redirected back the way it came, and the laser slammed into Cloudy's back, throwing him across the street. Yaoyorozu forced herself to her feet, tapping the device on her wrist and pulling up the formulas she needed. Cloudy lunged at Aoyama, but he pushed himself far away using naval laser just in time. Yaoyorozu finally pulled her strongest weapon out of her back a few seconds later, bracing the heavy weight against her shoulder as her stomach screamed at the loss of lipids. Hagakure-san, Yaoyorozu called out. Here. The voice responded cheerfully next to her. Jiru blinked, covering her ears on instinct. Wait, please, is that a… Yaoyorozu fired, and the rocket moved faster than her eyes could track. The smell of smoke was almost tangible, and the explosion did more than anything Bakugo had managed, she noticed with satisfaction. The area around Cloudy had been completely wrecked, the building behind him unrecognizable and the street ruined. Cloudy was still standing, but his arms had a clear dent in them and cracks were running down his body. The stolen staff had been destroyed from the attack. Yaoyorozu only had enough food left for a metal baton now, and the rest of her team was just as tired as she was. Despite that, she was having so much fun, fighting such a strong enemy like a real hero. Her parents would probably call her crazy if they could see her now. Yaoyorozu reinforced the baton before jabbing his chest. At the same time, a wave of sound pushed him to his knees and Hagakure leaped onto Cloudy's back. The invisible girl wrapped the capture tape around him, letting out a cheer. Gotcha. Their teacher's voice rang throughout the fake city soon after, signaling their victory. Atlas Sensei smiled at them as they returned, and the class clapped like they'd won a war. That was well done, Atlas Sensei praised, and she smiled back in pride. So for this team's analysis. Then Yaoyorozu's stomach chose that moment to finally voice its displeasure, letting out a rumble loud enough to cut her teacher off. Yaoyorozu flushed, sheepish. Can I go get dinner first? Yaoyorozu happily munched on her bento as Izuku resumed class. The rest of the third team was still trying to catch their breath. Aoyama and Jiru had pushed their quirks pretty far, and Hagakure had to be constantly on the move. They had passed and done great, in Izuku's opinion. Their plan was smart, Akari said, and they carried it out well. Yeah, Momo, I didn't know you could make actual rocket launchers. And grenades too. Ashido gushed. You're like a cooler Beka bro. Naturally, the mentioned boy took offense to that. What the hell did you just say, you damn extra? Yeah, and you were super fast with that staff. Where'd you learn that? Kirishima interrupted. After only a few days of living in a dorm, it seemed the other students were used to Katsuki's language. Izuku still wasn't. Why did the boy even need to curse that much? Yaoyorozu blushed under the praise. I have several tutors I practice with often, since my ability to create weapons would be useless without training. I guess that's true, Kaminari said. I don't think I could remember how to make all of that stuff. Of course you couldn't, your brain's completely fried. Jiru teased. Hey, Jiru did great, Uraraka said. Her quirk is how you all kept finding Cloudy, right? Yaoyorozu nodded. Right. Her sense of hearing was the reason we could plan all those attacks in the first place. Thanks, Prees. Her sound blasts did lots of damage, too. What about moi? Aoyama asked. Wasn't I fabulous back there? Kirishima smiled wide, exposing his shark-like teeth. Yeah, man, your aim was amazing. Though you overused your quirk, and ended up sick to your stomach. Ashido snickered, and the prideful boy wilted a little. I couldn't really tell where you were, Hagakure, in all the fighting, Fuji admitted. Were those white lights popping around yours? The floating gloves waved at him. My light magic isn't very good yet, but yeah, I can do cool stuff like that. Atlas Sensei couldn't do much against it, since you were completely invisible. But how did you avoid running into your teammates? Sato asked. Oh, Momo told me to step really loud. Hagakure answered. I didn't get it at first, but apparently Cloudy can't really hear that well, so it worked out great for us. Akari was staring at where Hagakure was, thoughtful. Did she notice something about the invisible girl's quirk? Izuku wondered, with her similar affinity for light. Izuku didn't think he'd ever have to teach an invisible student before. He could sense when she was nearby. The light did something weird around her and his mana could keep track of that. But that fact didn't change that he couldn't actually see Hagakure. What if she got knocked out, and nobody could find her? I've been meaning to ask, Atlas Sensei. Yaoyorozu mused, bringing him out of his thoughts. How are you controlling that clone so easily through a camera? Not to mention fighting fluidly. The vision range must be quite small, not to mention how we kept attacking from different angles. Izuku shrugged. Practice. The more precise your magic is, the more complex things you can do with it with the rig. He paused, turning to glance out the window at the fake city as tangible amounts of familiar mana covered the entire school like a red blanket. There goes his class time. It came from the sky, a streak of yellow crashing down faster than the cameras could catch. It hit the street like a meteor where Cloudy stood, smashing Izuku's poor air clone into a million pieces. Red eyes glanced about curiously at the ruined city, flickering out of existence. Yaoyorozu blinked, confused, as Cloudy seemed to vanish on screen. Wait, Atlas Sensei, where did… Oh, there you are. A voice came from Izuku's side. Every student in the room was startled at once, their heads whipping to the new blonde in the room. Kaminari screamed. Hello, Sekhmet. Izuku smiled. It's been a few years, hasn't it? Sekhmet hummed. Figured I'd visit. It really has been too long. But you seem the goddess glanced at his stunned class. Busy at the moment. Izuku introduced them. Sekhmet, this is class 1A. Wait, are those humans? In class, this is Sekhmet. Did she just call us humans? Well, we are humans, Ajiro-san. But who says it like that? Aunt Sekhmet, a girl shouted, and the goddess's red eyes instantly softened. Sekhmet caught the flying Akari easily, whirling her around with a smile. My favorite niece, but I'm your only. How have you been? Sekhmet asked. You've gotten even taller since the last time I saw you. Great. So I beat up a god this week with that punch you mentioned, and around Akari. Sekhmet flipped from a calm goddess into an excited aunt. It would be cute if Izuku wasn't so terrified of her influence. Sekhmet, I don't think I've ever heard of a hero like that. Ada murmured. Ah, that's because she isn't a hero, Izuku said. Sekhmet's her actual name. She's like my sensei. Atlas Sensei's sensei. She must be really strong. Kirishima exclaimed. Izuku shivered. Yeah, Sekhmet put Akari down before she could get dizzy, ruffling her hair. So you have human students now? Huh. When that happened? A few months ago. Seemed like fun. Ida was so taken aback by the casual answer, but most of the class just nodded with his explanation. Sekhmet blurred in front of Ashido, curious, and the girl jumped. So this is the quirk thing you mentioned, right? Been so long since I've seen one. Is the cool alien skin your ability? Ashido seemed to relax, almost unconsciously. My quirk's called acid, pretty self-explanatory. And I've looked like this my entire life as a neat side effect. What's your quirk, Sekhmet-san? Mine? I don't have one of those things. Yaoyorozu's eyes went wide. Wow, I've never met a quirkless person before. I didn't know there were still any people without quirks. I'm sorry. That must have been so rude. Sekhmet waved it off. Don't worry, I don't need one of those. Izuku could only sigh as she moved at blinding speed once more, stopping in front of Ajiro. She was scaring his students on purpose, wasn't she? Have enhancement magic, just like this kid seems to. Sekhmet squinted at the tailed boy. Though he is super weak right now. Ajiro winced. Is it rude to ask how this girl's invisible? Sekhmet wondered as the floating gloves let out a surprised eep. Yeah, but since when did you care about things like that? Izuku asked. Well, the Eraserhead burst into the room, capture scarf ready, his eyes tinged red as they searched the room. Where's the intruder? The hero trailed off, watching Sekhmet pat dark shadow on the head. This is Sekhmet, Izuku explained cheerfully. I know her, she's just visiting. Midoriya, she just broke through so many alarms. Where did she even come from? The sky, probably. We have a perfectly functional gate. Sekhmet tilted her head, confused. Who's Midoriya? That's my family name, Izuku answered. Her name is easier to say. Why do you need another? Eraserhead raised an eyebrow. Who exactly is she? Sekhmet poked him in the side, and Eraserhead flinched. Who's this? Another one of your students. He seems real scruffy. Uraraka choked. Eraserhead ground his teeth, and Izuku hurriedly stepped in. No, this is one of my co-workers. His name's Eraserhead. Sekhmet laughed. What kind of name is Eraserhead? Does his head erase things? Izuku brightened. Exactly. It's cool. His eyes change and then abilities just go poof. Really? Oi, tired man. Use it on me. Eraserhead seemed to have aged 20 years in the past minute but complied nonetheless, his eyes flashing red. Sekhmet said, thoughtfully. It's like my mana's being suppressed, somehow, yet he isn't using any magic at all. I wonder if I could overpower it. Please don't. Izuku pleaded. No way would that end well. Sekhmet rolled her eyes. Fine. I swear you take the fun out of everything. Remember when I wanted to see how far I could punt a person last decade, and you didn't let me? I think I was completely justified there. It would have been hilarious. Ida cleared his throat. Excuse me, but if Sekhmet isn't an alias, is that her actual name? Yeah, just call me Sekhmet, kid. Ida gasped, scandalized at the very idea. Eraserhead sighed, turning to Izuku as hands flew into the air, the rest of the class full of questions. Just get a visitor pass next time, so I never have to run here again. All right, this is weird, Sekhmet noted. She stood on Dagaba Beach next to him, watching the sun start to set like she had so many times before. Now, though, the beautiful sight was tainted by the groups of humans playing in sand and water, and shouts covered up the sound of waves. It really is, Izuku agreed. I've had a few months to get used to it, but even then, seeing so many people is just strange. Especially here, his spot. How do you train in peace, then? Izuku shrugged. I go to heaven or just run further into the ocean, out of sight. Training on the water is good practice for my magic. Anyway, right, you can make water solid. That still doesn't make any sense, by the way. Sekhmet, I've explained it so many times. Shouldn't the water just get stronger? Do you want a lecture on magic theory? Sekhmet shook her head, vehemently, and Izuku huffed. Maybe next time. That's what I thought. Also, I've been meaning to ask, but why are you wearing armor? Sekhmet blinked like she hadn't noticed the decorated plates running along her body, colored an intimidating red. Oh, this. Mom made me go to this thing earlier, something about a challenger for my champion title. I don't know, it was really boring. Wait, isn't that supposed to be a really big deal? Izuku exclaimed. Nope, it's just a pain. I can tell when there's an actual fight, and when it's a weakling that I still have to deal with anyway. Like you. Izuku frowned. I'm not that Sekhmet ruthlessly cut him off. Izuku, how many times have you won against me? Izuku opened his mouth before closing it. Exactly, Sekhmet said, smug. Alas, I've tried so hard to teach you everything I know. You never teach me anything. Sekhmet, you just beat me up. For centuries, only to be so disappointed. But anyway, so I knocked her out with a punch. Izuku winced in sympathy, and came to check on my precious student, to see if he's gotten any stronger. Sekhmet's voice was still light, but Izuku tensed. The speed I used in that room, with the humans. You're faster than the last time I saw you, but the actual reflexes you're slower. So she hadn't just been zipping around the room for fun. Izuku realized too late. You haven't had a serious fight in years, right? I haven't either. Most of the gods, and definitely none of the humans here, would really give you much of a challenge. Izuku thought of All For One, how much power he'd had to use. But that was more like dealing with an elusive bug. The man himself hadn't really posed a threat to him. All Might, who didn't have annoying amounts of regeneration, could be knocked out without using his staff. And there was no way other humans would be as strong as those two. And? Izuku asked, really not liking where this was going. Sekhmet grinned, full of teeth. I can fix that for you, my dear student. Don't worry, sensei. Izuku started. You really don't need to go through the trouble. Sekhmet warped the both of them before he could even react, the beach around them disappearing in a blur of mana. Fuck. Izuku's vision sharpened, taking in the bright green trees stretching below him as far as he could see, the fact that he was high up in the air and currently falling down through branches that barely stopped his fall. He tucked his body in on impact, tumbling across the forest floor before finally coming to a stop. He stood to his feet, brushing the leaves out of his shirt. Sekhmet had probably taken him somewhere in heaven, but he had no idea where. Somewhere isolated, where a huge fight wouldn't disturb anyone. With Void, his mana would be untraceable, so Izuku could hide and escape. Knowing his sensei, though, that'd never work. She'd just destroy the entire forest. She was also ridiculously fast, so that left combat, Izuku realized, and with his trusty staff sheathed across his back, he waited. 5 seconds passed before he felt the wind shift, and he dove to the side on instinct. The tree behind him shattered as the Sekhmet's first punch flew past his head, wood flying out like shrapnel. Izuku ducked under a roundhouse kick just in time, throwing his palm out, and the air tinged purple as it forced her back like a weighted blanket. If you wanted to fight, you could have just asked, Izuku muttered under his breath. His tyrannical sensei let out a laugh at the thought. But where's the fun in that? She sliced through the air barrier like it was nothing, and Izuku attacked. Sekhmet deflected 2 punches easily before sliding past the following kick, her elbow striking his gut before her arm whipped the other way, and the back of her fist smacked his jaw. Izuku stumbled back, recalculating, raising both arms to cover his face like a boxer. He caught her next chop on his forearm, his fists flying in a volley of jabs in that same instant. Sekhmet weaved through the attacks before aiming straight for his unprotected stomach. Izuku caught the punch with both hands, turning in the same motion to throw her up over his shoulder, only for Sekhmet to twist in midair, straightening out her legs to somehow land on her feet. He was still holding her arm and she pulled him in, knee slamming into his gut and knocking the breath out of him. She grabbed him by the shirt and launching him through a tree, sending him tumbling across the forest clearing. Sekhmet was dashing forward before he could even stand up, but this time countless air chains stopped her, tugging at her arms. Sekhmet broke free in an instant, but more chains wrapped around her legs and dragged her down into the ground, like purple snakes. Izuku reinforced the earth to trap her before he lifted the trees around him at once. Stray leaves drifted down as Izuku raised the woods higher and higher, little threads of air connected to the roots and flowing his magic through the floating forest. They shined purple as he dropped them down, an angry storm of trees crashing down on his sensei. She was completely covered in the pile, and Izuku wondered for a split second if that had really worked. Then the world exploded, the wall of wood helpless against the overwhelming force. Izuku's eyes went wide as the wind rushed past him, blowing back his now dusty hair. Sekhmet stood without a scratch, the forest clearing devastated around her, hand raised in the air. Her fist glowed a bright red. He'd made her get serious. Izuku felt instant regret seep into his bones. That was tricky, actually, Sekhmet mused. Not using my magic after a move like that would be pretty rude, wouldn't it? As she talked, her enhancement magic slowly massed around her like a cloak, very much not a good sign. He needed to interrupt her. Stance 6, Javelin. In a fluid movement, he unsheathed the staff from his back before pouring his reinforcement and throwing it with all of his might. The weapon cut through the air like a missile, straight at her face. Sekhmet tilted her head and the staff blazed by, only grazing her cheek. That was too obvious, Izuku. But then the air pulled at the staff, strings upon strings of mana connecting and yanking it back like a rubber band. The attack slammed into her back at twice the speed, and she stumbled forward in surprise. He kicked her in the side in the opening, catching his staff as it fell and swinging it towards her face. Sekhmet's palm glowed red as it effortlessly stopped the blow, and Izuku's eyes went wide. The next kick sent him flying back as dug his heels into the dirt and blinked back stars. Sekhmet moved way faster than he could react. Then what he needed to do was, with a flash of red, Sekhmet was already on him. This time he willingly took the punch, feeling his chest scream even as he moved with the momentum, pulling one end of his staff down to lift the other side like a lever. Stance 10, uppercut. The blow cracked against her jaw, forcing her head to glance up. Stance 1, sweep. Sekhmet leaped up, barely clearing the attack in time. But Izuku was already flowing into his next stance as he grabbed the base of his staff with both hands and swung. Stance 2, bash. In the air, Sekhmet couldn't dodge fast enough. The impact carried through her arms, pushing her off balance. Stance 3, pierce. As Izuku pulled his staff back, he stepped to the side so he was holding the staff parallel to the ground and stabbed forward. Sekhmet's hand closed around the staff, centimeters from her face, and his second strongest stance stopped dead short. Her entire body was imbued with mana now, seeping through her like blood. It was almost tangible in the air around her, the pure energy burning his skin as she got stronger and stronger. Izuku had never seen her use this much power before, and he was terrified. He pulled on the staff desperately, but it didn't even budge in her grip. That was a good fight, wasn't it? Very fun, Izuku said, his voice shaking. But you know, we really should be getting back now. Sekhmet cracked her knuckles. Oh, don't worry about that. I told Aurora we'd be back late. And we're just getting started, right? Izuku let go of the staff, dropping to the ground. The attack missed, and the air pressure uprooted an entire forest behind him. Loud winds all he could hear as the miniature hurricane swept across the ruined landscape. Holy shit, he didn't have time to stare. Rolling to the side as an axe kick carved the earth where he stood, Sekhmet threw his precious staff to the side carelessly. He made obstacles to buy time, but it was useless. She shattered his air shield and her enhanced form tore through his chains without pause. Reinforcement magic was useless without his staff, apparently. So Izuku activated Void, letting go of his magic as the technique took effect. His ability to sense mana was unmatched in this state, and the only way he'd last another few seconds. The only source of mana for miles was the overpowered goddess in front of him, a bright red outline. He focused, following the red body as it started to move. Izuku ducked under a roundhouse kick, seeing the mana build for a follow-up and sidestepping just in time. He weaved through a barrage of red fists before leaping back as she punched a hole in the ground. All he could see was a blur, but with her entire body enhanced, that was enough. He parried a blow that would have taken his head off, and then another aimed at his side. How are you doing that? Are you predicting my moves? Sekhmet mused, even as Izuku narrowly dodged 3 more jabs. I doubt it's some kind of precognition. Wait, I think I've got it. Her mana suddenly flared out, and Izuku jumped back on instinct. Oh, my mana. That's clever. But you can't even attack like that. Too concentrated on dodging, Izuku winced, forced to block a punch that made his left arm ache. And what if I go faster, say 80%? Izuku twisted, but the speeding punch still struck his side before he could get out of the way. I don't remember you being this mean, Izuku whined, letting out a hiss of pain. Sekhmet shrugged. You're strong now. Why should I go easy on you? Izuku blinked. What? Really? You think I'm strong? Sekhmet rolled her eyes. I haven't gotten a chance to fight this hard in thousands of years. You're skilled, Izuku, even if you are really dense. Huh, that's not what you said earlier. That was just so you'd let your guard enough for an unwilling warp. Which worked, by the way. Oh, Izuku felt a wide smile stretch across his face. Stop doing that. Sekhmet frowned. That's weird. Doing what? Izuku turned Void off and pulled his staff back into his hands with a few air strands. This time, he tried for more reinforcement than before, flowing more and more mana into the staff until he finally felt the metal crack. He actually had so much more mana now. Why was he sticking to a familiar limit? Izuku smiled wider. Thanks, Sekhmet. For what? Stance 7, burst. Izuku focused on his legs, pushing off against the ground in a single breath and launching himself forward. For a single instant, he was just as fast as Sekhmet. He stepped behind her, slashing down in an arc. She barely ducked under it in time, and his staff twirled in his hands as he attacked, lashing out in flashes of purple. Izuku blocked a devastating kick, and the staff held against the massive amount of force without complaint even as the impact jolted through his arms. He couldn't see attacks coming as he had before, but the more he fought, the more he adapted. The staff spun in front of him, batting away blows as he made his own strikes. He was having fun, he realized. Stance 8, hook. He caught the back of Sekhmet's neck, yanking her forward as the other end of the staff struck her stomach. Izuku sidestepped her next blow easily. Stance 2, bah. It was a feint, and the actual punch slammed into his side with an audible crack. He didn't falter, countering back. I've been meaning to ask, but Izuku, do you say your stances out loud? Sekhmet asked, aiming another strike that he deflected on reflex. Why not? It's fun. It sounds dumb. Stance 1, sweep. Sekhmet stepped back automatically, and Pierce drove into her stomach and knocked her back. Izuku grinned. He pressed the attack, metal flashing as his staff spun faster and faster. He could win if he kept this up. Sekhmet was a being of perfect control. As the strongest, if she didn't know how to hold back, she'd accidentally kill her opponent. So she took her ridiculously huge amount of power and divided it into neat percentages. By accurately judging the enemy, she knew exactly how much enhancement to use, and they wouldn't end up dead. And as Izuku grew to have similar strength, she taught him that control so he didn't break his precious city with a twitch. Sekhmet spent ages rarely going above a comfortable 20%. But for the first time in forever, she got a chance to go all out. Izuku didn't see it. One moment he was swinging his staff, and the next his chest exploded with pain and he was slamming into a mountain miles and miles away. He slumped to the ground, staring at the path of destruction, trees and bushes destroyed in line from where he flew from, stretching as far as he could see. The adrenaline started to wear off. His limbs were numb, his back was wrecked, and his ribs were definitely broken from that last hit. He let out a sigh before grimacing as his body protested the action. Izuku heard Sekhmet land near him, and she snapped her fingers, healing him in a familiar flash of green. The bones and bruises knitted together through magic, reigniting the pain. Luckily, he had insane pain tolerance, Izuku thought, half-conscious. Good fight, Izuku. He glanced up, expecting sarcasm, to see Sekhmet smile genuinely at him, actually reaching her eyes. He couldn't remember the last time he'd seen his sensei that happy. Whatever it was, he was glad for her. Izuku took her hand, and as she pulled his exhausted body to his feet he couldn't help but smile back. Yeah, it was. Izuku looked up at the mountain's peak, ignoring the freezing winds against his cloak, high above the surrounding landscape. And with nobody around as far as he could see, it was the perfect place to train. Really, Izuku needed to start a travel agency. He'd seen and explored enough area for several lifetimes. After so many years, Izuku finally forced Sekhmet to stop holding back, and evidently, he wasn't close to matching her yet. How could he change that? Izuku fought by reinforcing his staff using the violet reinforcement magic Aurora gave him, and his air constructs. He trained his physical body diligently, getting a bit more powerful every day. And his stances and martial arts were his own, practiced over and over again until a simple attack turned into a triumph card of its own. He could destroy entire cities with a kick, hold up the sky, and survive a punch from the second strongest goddess. But what about his magic? The amount of mana he had increased many times over. He'd been proud of himself for creating his void technique, something creative and useful. But despite all that practice, Izuku hadn't really improved his magic in centuries, even after he became a teacher at Arcadia. There just hadn't been a need, and his entire life wasn't consumed by training himself anymore. Izuku pushed reinforcement magic farther than anyone had before, but in the end, he'd just stopped just like everyone else, hadn't he? Sekhmet broke through his air chains like they were nothing, and his reinforcement wasn't even enough to phase her with solid objects. The only thing that had worked was, Izuku glanced down at his precious staff, tossing it from hand to hand. Scratches and dents lined the metal from centuries of use, and one end was visibly cracked after his fight with Sekhmet. The weapon was worn, old. Izuku slowly reinforced it, flowing more and more mana into the weapon like a river of energy. The staff outlined in violet at the first stage, his mana surrounding it like a coat. Then he filled it up from the inside, the gray starting to change color. He stopped when the staff glowed bright, shining with power in his grip. Izuku frowned. At a mere 50% of Izuku's mana, the weapon trembled in his grip. Any more reinforcement and it'd break. His no longer trusty staff had gotten too weak for him long ago, and Izuku hadn't even noticed. If a physical staff didn't work, what about? The frosty air solidified into a new bow staff, and Izuku adjusted the weight until it was just right. Then he reinforced the makeshift weapon even further. His air constructs were mostly held together through mana, so they could handle a lot more of it than metal. Izuku angled himself so that his left side faced the mountain. The beautiful violet staff held parallel to the snowy ground beneath him and thrust forward with all of his might. Stance 3, Pierce. The rock in front of him exploded inward in a massive burst of force, drilling a huge hole through the mountain and clearing the snow and mist. The strike kept going, a shockwave slamming through smaller mountain peaks almost like collapsing dominoes. But when Izuku glanced down, the air staff had completely crumbled into nothing, dissipating back into the chilling air around him. His mana couldn't hold up to the immense force yet. But an air staff could still perform a single stance, and meaning they had potential. Izuku had never even considered it before too attached to his metal one. Izuku created a second staff, stepping into another pierce that devastated the icy landscape in front of him. Then a third weapon formed into existence. Thrusting again, a fourth disintegrated. Then a fifth, each one just a bit stronger than the last. He could definitely use this. I'm done with them, Toru. Done with what? Akari tapped the cover of Harry Potter and the Goblet of Fire with a finger. The books you gave me this morning. Oh, those wait, you're already done. Yeah, why wouldn't she be? Wow, you read super fast. The invisible girl exclaimed. I haven't gotten anyone else hooked on my pre-Quirk era books yet. What do you think? I like them a lot, but the magic's weird. Akari mused. It does all sorts of different things. But I couldn't imagine having to shout strange words to a stick to do anything. It'd probably feel pretty ridiculous. True, but this was written over 200 years ago, back before humans had any kind of powers. I doubt the author could have guessed humanity would end up like this. White sparks drifted off her t-shirt, flying up to the ceiling. I mean, it's been 5 years and I still can't believe I have magic. Their mana was the same color, Akari noticed. Toru wasn't nearly as experienced at magic as she was, but her mutant quirk was essentially just a difficult application of magic. Akari could see Toru's vague form when she squinted, the constant light manipulation poking at her mana sense. I haven't seen anything like their magic items, though. Like, having the invisibility cloak sounds really fun. The pranks were practically endless, though you would know about that, Toru. What's being invisible like? Akari asked, curious. The floating t-shirt froze. Akari instantly regretted the rude question. I'm sorry, you don't have to answer that. Toru waved a sleeve at her. No, it's fine. I get that question a lot, looking like thighs. It's fun, sometimes. No one sees me, so I can get away with a lot of small, silly things. I made this bully think he was being haunted, once. That was fun. Wow, but the rest of the time. I hate invisibility so much. Some things are impossible when you can't see yourself or get noticed, Toru said quietly. Her voice was the only way Akari could tell what she was feeling without any facial expressions. That's why she moved her clothes so much almost every time she talked, Akari realized with growing horror. Quirks came in when humans were very young, Akari knew. Could Toru even remember what she looked like? You can't turn it off, can you? Akari muttered. Nope. Even if I try as hard as I can, or get knocked unconscious, I'll stay just like this. The t-shirt sleeves dropped, falling to her side. Sorry for venting on you like this, Akari. I've only known you for weeks, but I really needed you to understand. I'm going to help. I don't think anyone can, Akari, Toru muttered bitterly. My parents have taken me to so many. I'm going to help, Akari repeated, determined, as she grabbed both of Toru's invisible hands. I swear it. Aizawa-sensei let out a long yawn. So am I here again? It's late. The three of them stood in an empty gym gamma, Akari still holding her friend's hand in a death grip. I'm doing some testing with Toru's quirk, Akari stated. Aizawa-sensei, I have no clue what she's doing. Help. And you're here for if, well, anything goes wrong. So I'm insurance, then. Fine, but this better be worth ruining my nap, Aizawa-sensei said. The demigod interlocked their hands, closing her eyes. Okay, Toru, don't move. Akari's mana flared up, a wealth of white energy that filled the space around her, and she focused it through Toru like a circuit. Wow, Toru gasped. That tickles. Careful, Toru. This is kinda a delicate process. Mom had taught her this years ago, how to flow her mana through another person. It was usually a pretty important show of trust for gods. Not that Toru knew that, or the fact that Akari was scanning her. Toru's mana seemed normal, and the girl wasn't currently using any of it. Right now, Akari could vividly see how her entire body was constantly manipulating the light around her, making her invisible. But if her quirk was affecting her eyes, too, how could Toru even see? And how could Akari see things behind Toru? Akari needed to understand exactly what invisibility was doing before she messed with it, so carefully she pushed a bit of hardened light at her friend's arm. Barely enough to be a poke, and observed the results. Instead of being redirected, the ball reappeared behind Toru's arm. Weird. The projectile never actually passed through Toru. Did invisibility move light around as soon as it hit Toru, in some kind of transparent-like effect? Clearly, this quirk was a lot more complicated than she expected. She concentrated, building a mental image in her head before letting go of the scan. I'm going to work on this, Akari said, opening her eyes. You, she pointed at a confused Toru and an exhausted Aizawa-sensei. Meet me here in 24 hours. On the dot. Aizawa-sensei sighed. Akari marched back into Gym Gamma, dragging Toru behind her. In her other hand, she held a bright green notebook. Toru watched, stunned, as Akari flipped through pages filled with writing. Wait, when did you get all of this information? Yesterday, duh. Oh, that sparkly thing. But when did you have time to write all of this? Please tell me you slept, Akari. I did totally. Anyway, Aizawa-sensei, come here. The man grumbled but complied, walking over to the side. Akari pointed in front of her. Toru, stand there. Akari tore out the last page of her notebook, a highly detailed diagram of Toru's mana circuits and her invisibility. Different parts of her body were labeled with varying levels of the quirk. Notes were scribbled all over the paper, arrows pointing out how the different levels of refraction worked, and how it'd all affect Toru. The system she was planning had taken her all night, and she was pretty excited to try it. Akari, what exactly are you going to do? Toru asked nervously. If this is going to kill us, I'd at least want to know beforehand, Aizawa-sensei muttered. This isn't going to backfire, I think. Very reassuring, Midoriya. Akari tried again. Don't worry, Toru. I'm just using a very intricate mana system I made last night to nullify your body's automatic light refraction, so you become visible again. What? That sounds scary, but also really cool. Do it? Akari smiled at her. All right, then, I'm going to start now. This time, Akari's bright green eyes were open, concentrating on what she was doing. She was about to do a lot more than a simple mana scan. She couldn't afford to mess up and hurt her friend. Pure white mana drifted through their connected hands, flowing all the way down to Toru's toes before rising up to her head. Her hair was tricky, taking longer to work with, but Akari got every last strand before moving on. Once she had a firm hold, Akari felt Toru's light refraction with her mana and then pushed in the opposite direction, as if she was stopping a river. Toru, are you okay? Nothing hurts, right? Nope, I'm fine. It just feels really tingly. Akari nodded, adding more energy. Keeping track of Toru's entire body was starting to give her a headache, but as the minutes passed, she could tell it was working. Just a little more, and then Toru shimmered into existence. Her concerningly pale hands turned visible first, still held in Akari's own, before the rest of her came into focus. She had long, opal-like hair that almost came to her shoulders, and colors danced in it like pieces of a rainbow. Toru's wide eyes were a pure blue, and the rest of her face was blank from shock. She must have never had to worry about facial expressions before. Akari blinked, realizing she had been staring way too long. Wow, Toru watched her hands move incredulously, curling and uncurling her fingers. Wait, I'm visible, Toru whispered. Akari grinned. Yeah, no way. Yep. Oh my god, Akari, I'm visible. Look at my hair. It's so shiny. And Toru poked her elbow. I have arms. You do. Legs too. Wow, this is so weird. Toru giggled. Wait, you can see my face, right? What do I look like? The now visible girl smiled, excited. Amazing. You look amazing, Toru. Here, try to take a selfie careful. Don't let go of my hand, you'll break the connection. Wow, is that me? I look nothing like I remember. Aizawa-sensei stepped up behind them, hand cupping his chin. Interesting. How long can you hold that with your magic, Midoriya? As long as I'm touching Toru. Around 10 minutes, I guess. The mana usage isn't much, but the amount of focus I need is a lot. Aizawa-sensei nodded. I can use my erasure on Hagakure now that she's visible if you need a short break. But it won't last more than a minute. Arms wrapped around Akari as Toru pulled her into a fierce hug. Thank you, Akari. I don't even know how to. You don't have to do anything in return for me, Toru. You're my friend. Akari hesitated for a moment before hugging Toru back. It's not complete yet. You're only visible for a few minutes right now. You don't get it. Being able to see me, even if it's temporary, means everything. I even have a picture now, so I can't forget my face again. Toru pulled away enough so that Akari could see her face. The no longer invisible girl still holding onto Akari's shoulders. But Akari, can I ask you something? Akari tilted her head. Yeah, what is it? Can I introduce you to my parents? And that was how Akari was here, sitting with the Hagakure family for dinner and having no clue what to say. Had she even processed Toru's request before she said yes? Probably not. Your cooking's really good, Hagakure. Akari complimented, breaking the silence. Only for both of Toru's parents glanced at her. Her cheeks reddened. Right, that was not just Toru's mother's surname and she'd forgotten the honorific thing, too. Thank you, dear. Don't worry about surnames and all that here if it's less confusing. You can just call me Aka-san. Hagakure Mary said brightly. It was pretty clear where Toru got her personality from. Akari nodded. Sure, Aka-san. The word was a little weird on her tongue, but if she was going to live in Japan she should probably get used to stuff like this. She couldn't call everyone their given names, after all. And for some reason, Akari wanted to make a good impression on these two. The both of you are classmates, right? Hagakure Takashi said. How's UA been for you two, so far? Toru's father seemed to be a little more reserved than the other two, yet he had that same energy around him. Surprisingly, neither of Toru's parents were invisible like she was. Akari desperately wanted to ask about their quirks. Was that rude? I've been enjoying the classes so far. UA University is an unique experience, Akari said thoughtfully. And all my new classmates are all interesting. Akari's the strongest in our class, Toru exclaimed. We saw her fight at the USJ. and it was so cool. That field trip was terrible for us to hear about, Takashi said. I'm glad you were there to protect Toru, Midoriya. Akari blinked. How'd you? Takashi smiled. Just a guess from what Toru told us about the attack. And while the media doesn't know much about the incident, there are plenty of theories. Do you need to call your parents, Midoriya-chan? Mary asked. I know that Toru probably troubled you, inviting you over suddenly. A glare and the floating shirt seemed to wilt. Akari waved it off. Don't worry, Aka-san. I told my mom where I was. Toru didn't trouble us at all. And Dad's away right now. Away. He's somewhere in heaven, but she couldn't say that. Out of country, right now. Isn't your father Atlas, Midoriya-chan? Hero work must make him really busy. Yeah, what's having your dad as your heroics teacher like? Mary asked. Akari shrugged. Dad's a really good teacher. He's helped me train ever since I was little. Learning from him at UA is just expanding on that. Atlas sensei's really nice, though he doesn't go easy on us when we train. Toru shivered a little, likely remembering Cloudy. He kinda reminds me of All Might. Atlas reminds you of the symbol of peace. Really? Mary repeated. Exactly. It's strange. You know how All Might goes. Toru made her voice several times deeper. I am here. To her credit, Toru's mother didn't even blink at the impersonation. Yes, with Atlas, he doesn't need to say anything like that. Toru shrugged. He's a lot more casual than All Might is, but reassuring all the same. He was making jokes when he was fighting the ringleader guy, too. He sounds like a great hero, Toru. Takashi smiled. Yeah, he is. Hey Toru, Akari asked. Do you want to do the thing now? Oh, right, I almost forgot. Mom, Dad, we have something really cool to show you. A surprise. Toru jumped out of her seat, excited, and Akari took her hand in hers. It was easier to make her friend visible the second time, nullifying her quirk almost immediately. The room was silent. Honey, am I dreaming right now? Takashi whispered. Mary rubbed her eyes. I'm seeing the same thing, dear. Midoriya-chan, how? Toru's mother stepped forward slowly, gently brushing Toru's silver hair to the side. She framed her daughter's face with her hands. It's been so many years since I've seen you, not that we love you any less for it. But wow, you've grown up so much, Toru. Akari almost felt like she was intruding on a private moment, but she couldn't go anywhere when she was the one keeping Toru visible. Toru's blue eyes were shining. Thanks, Mom. Midoriya, Takashi started, awed. How did you? Akari smiled softly. I'm pretty good at light magic. I wanted to help Toru. Toru, Takashi murmured. So I found a way to do it. It only works while I'm touching her at the moment, but maybe someday she'll be visible whenever she wants. Toru gripped her hand a little tighter. I don't know how we can thank you for showing us our daughter. Akari shook her head. I did this because I wanted to, Hagakure-san. You don't have to thank me. By the way, I can keep this up for 10 minutes, so if the three of you want to take pictures. It was a little awkward, taking their group picture with one hand without letting go of Toru. The Hagakure family's smiles, though, were blindingly bright, and Toru looked like she was having the happiest moment of her life. Now you come in too, Akari. Toru cheered. You're tall enough to take the selfie, right? Akari blinked. Wah, come on. Then Toru yanked her forward, and Akari was stumbling right into the center of the Hagakure family. Oh, this is happening now. Aurora closed her book as Izuku walked through their front door, glancing at his snow-covered cloak. Were you training in the mountains again? She asked, placing a hand on his cheek. Yeah, wow, your hand's warm. Aurora frowned. That's because her skin's practically freezing. Izuku. Oh, how long were you there? I didn't see you come back after you fought Sekhmet, and that was hours ago. Izuku blinked. How'd you know about that? Sekhmet passed by earlier before she checked in on you, and well, my sister starts a fight whenever she visits. That she does. Izuku agreed, his entire body still aching from that last punch. You avoided my question, I see. Let me guess, the second Sekhmet healed you, you went off to train. No, Aurora's beautiful eyes narrowed, and Izuku instantly backtracked. Okay, I did. But don't worry, Aurora. I'm completely fine. Aurora poked him in the chest. Oh, fine, The goddess sighed. This is why I worry. Neither you nor my sister have any sense of self-preservation. How did you get this badly hurt? Sekhmet's healing magic usually has you as good as new in minutes. Actually, I finally made her use all of her mana. We were fighting for a while, and it was really fun. Though I was mostly terrified since she started the fight out of nowhere. But I was doing well, and then suddenly she went all out like bam, and I was flying. Wait, where are you going? Aurora. Violet mana filled the living room as Aurora's armor formed around her like crystal scales, the princess marching towards the door on a warpath. I just need to talk to her. Izuku wrapped his arms around his wife's waist, barely holding the goddess in place. No, wait, don't kill Sekhmet. Why not? We like her, remember, and she's Akari's favorite aunt. Izuku pointed out. What? I don't have any other sisters, and you're an only child. Exactly. The armor finally dropped with a shimmer of light, and Aurora crossed her arms with a huff. Fine. But next time we're fighting her together, all right. Izuku grinned, hugging her tighter. Of course, only after you're completely healed. Izuku. Aurora leaned back into his chest with a sigh. And please be a little bit more careful. Sure, you got snow everywhere, too. My bad. But hey, Eri's never seen snow before, right? She'll love it. Aurora hummed. That's true. We should show her somewhere with plenty of it sometime. Izuku rested his chin on her hair. That sounds fun, Aurora. I'll ask Akari when she gets back. I'll buy Eri a cute jacket and everything. It'd probably be easier to plan a trip if we went to heaven, right? Yeah, we can't travel across Earth without raising a lot of questions, Izuku murmured. Speaking of Eri, she wanted to show you. Izuku lifted his wife up, zipping over at full speed to their youngest daughter's room. Something earlier. Aurora paused as the world around her blurred. Izuku, you know I can walk by myself, right? But this is more fun, right? Eri's red eyes lit up as soon she saw them. Izuku, you're back. They both bent down to her level, catching their unicorn in a hug. Hello, Eri, Izuku said. Did you want to show me something? Eri nodded, turning to search through the piles of papers strewn all over the floor. Some were folded into various shapes, while the rest had all kinds of drawings on them. There were pencils littered throughout the storm of art. Here, Eri proudly presented her creation to him, and Izuku took it carefully. It was a paper cone, shaded light yellow by a colored pencil. The bottom was held together firmly with tape. Oh, it was what is it? Izuku whispered to his wife. Aurora rolled her eyes at him. It goes on your forehead, silly. Eri pouted. Like this? Izuku asked, reinforcing the hat to make sure it stayed on. Eri squinted at him, judging it acceptable, before handing Aurora one too. Oh, that's what those were. Eri beamed at them, and Izuku's heart melted faster than the snow in his hair. Now you're both unicorns, just like me. Aurora smiled, soft, as she gently adjusted the paper horn on her head. I love it, Eri. Thank you. How did you think of this? Izuku patted the girl on the head, and Eri smiled even brighter. I was thinking about how you and Dad, Izuku froze. Don't have a horn, as I do. And Mom, you always say that mine is super beautiful, so I made horns for you too. Eri finished, happily. That's really clever, Eri. Aurora's lip trembled. Mom, Dad, are you okay? We're fine. We just love you, honey. Oh, Eri thought about this, then brightened. I love you both, too. A lot. They pulled their daughter into a hug, sobbing into her unicorn onesie, and Eri's tiny arms wrapped around them tightly. Izuku hummed a song he'd heard somewhere under his breath, leaping across through the sky in his iconic cloak-turned-hero costume. Violet platforms formed underneath his feet like stepping stones, pushing him further with each jump. Excited shouts and points came from the street below. He was rapidly rising through the hero poles. He wasn't very flashy, all of his fights ending in a blink, yet he somehow had a growing fanbase anyway. According to his co-workers at UA, he was seen as the next symbol of peace, his strength compared to All Might. Izuku didn't really care. The hero rankings were based on popularity, not strength, and that's not why he became a hero. Fighting human enemies was interesting and new, each villain with their own unique quirk or magic. And then there were the sharp, foreign mana brushed against the edge of Izuku's senses, jolting him out of his thoughts. Izuku twisted midair, kicking off in the opposite direction, wind blowing past his face and rippling through his hair. Ever since humanity returned, yellow portals had been opening, carrying with them this unnatural mana that made Izuku's gut twist. They hadn't been a problem at the start, both extremely rare and bringing ridiculously weak monsters. Heroes could deal with them with ease, especially those used to taking out monsters during the drift. But as months passed, the portals only grew increasingly common and more dangerous. Izuku cut through the sky, a few jumps taking him to Hasu City in a minute. He closed in on the scene, landing on the street without a sound. Heroes were already on the scene, Izuku noticed. The duo had gotten all of the civilians out of harm's way and were beating back the creature. There was only one monster, the large yellow portal slowly closing behind it. It was bigger than anything Izuku had seen so far, a green, scaly body as wide as a truck. Two heads whipped around, blasting yellow energy at the heroes. Izuku watched as the leader, a man completely covered in white armor, blazed circles around the beast, dual blades on his arms slashing at it with each pass. His psychic fired off blue blasts while he drew its attention, attacking from range. Their teamwork was fluid and impressive. The monster lunged, and the armored man slid under its jaws, tracing a long cut with his blades. It roared in pain, golden dust floating off the wound, and the other hero struck with a burst in the opening. Izuku stepped next to the hero as he caught his breath, the engines on his arms giving off smoke. Hello, he startled, eyes going wide behind his helmet. Atlas-san, when'd you get here? Izuku lifted his hand and the twin heads harmlessly crashed against an air barrier, protecting Ingenium's psychic. She stared at the sudden force field, confused. Just now, do you two want help with that thing? Izuku asked. They were handling it fine, but Izuku could never just sit back and watch when people were in danger. Also, this guy was clearly Ada's dad or something. Ada's dad nodded. Yeah, that did. Izuku's fist flew and a gaping hole carved into the monster's chest in an instant. It stilled, both heads glancing down in confusion as it disintegrated into dust. He still didn't get why monsters died like that, but not having to deal with the bodies was nice. Be great, he trailed off. Holy shit, they weren't kidding about you. Thanks for the assist. No problem. Hey, you're Ingenium, right? I think your son's in my class, Izuku said. Ingenium's sidekick coughed next to him, and the hero seemed to wilt behind his armor. My what? Izuku held a hand in front of his chest. This tall, serious, has engines. Oh, you mean Tenya. I heard you were the heroics teacher at UA. How's my brother doing? Ingenium stressed the word. He's driven and has potential, but kinda stiff. Ada emulates you a lot, Izuku commented. Their hero costumes looked nearly identical, and they even fought similarly with their engines. Ingenium seemed a lot smoother though, more natural. Ingenium chuckled. That he does. Can I ask you something, Atlas-san? Sure. Why is there a yellow cone on your head? I thought it was a mutation at first, but up close. Oh, this. Izuku smiled, tapping the reinforced implement with a finger. It's my horn. Ingenium stared. But it's clearly made of paper. It's my horn. A yellow sleeping bag slithered into the gym like some kind of giant snake. Akari and the rest of her class didn't even bat an eye at Aizawa-sensei's entrance, though she did wonder when the man actually got into the bag. Did he crawl all the way here from the teacher's lounge? Aizawa-sensei yawned as he stood to his feet. Alright, Hellspawn. As you know, the UA Sports Festival is in 4 weeks. That means we're going to be increasing your training immensely plus ultra or whatever. Akari slowly raised her hand. What's the sports festival? Aizawa-sensei blinked. I guess it has been 5 years. Basically, all of the students in the year face off in competitions, with the last round being tournament fights. Many citizens tune in to watch it every year. That sounded pretty fun. Didn't we just get attacked by a bunch of villains? What if that happens again? Kaminari asked. That won't be a concern. We will have several heroes patrolling the event and in attendance, including Atlas and All Might. This is the first sports festival after the drift, making it incredibly important to display the strength of our future heroes. Isn't showing off our strengths and weaknesses a terrible idea? Fuji said hesitantly. Aizawa-sensei sighed. Yes, but that's exactly what's going to happen to any hero that works in the spotlight. If you need to, talk to me after class so you can opt out. However, this is also an excellent chance to get internship offers from heroes who see you in action. He walked over to the training mats at the center of the gym, the class trailing behind him like baby birds. Raise your hand if you have any experience with hand-to-hand combat. Akari did so, along with barely a third of their hero class. Aizawa-sensei sighed. Those you have at least some idea what you're doing, pair off on the mats there. No emitter and transformative quirks allowed. First one to be pushed off or knocked out wins. The rest of you will be working with me to get some foundation. Isn't this a little unfair for people who don't have mutation quirks? Shoji asked. Despite living in the same dorm, Akari never saw the man without that cool mask on. He probably liked being mysterious or something. Preparing for that kind of situation is part of why we're doing this, Aizawa stated simply. And asking you, Fuji, and Ajiro not to use your extra limbs would throw you off balance. Asui, you're an exception. Don't use your tongue. Okay, sensei. Aizawa-sensei glanced at Akari, probably thinking about her physical strength. He knew she had the common sense to hold back, though she doubted he knew just how much stronger she was. Fuck yes. How badly can I hurt them? No permanent injury, Bakugo, Aizawa-sensei said, leading his group away. The remaining members of WANA edged carefully away from the blonde. Akari paired up with Kirishima, standing across from the boy with the large blue training mat between them. His hero costume left him completely shirtless for some reason. Maybe it got in the way of his hardening. Let's have a manly fight, Midoriya. Kirishima grinned, his teeth razor sharp. Sure. Akari smiled back, his excitement infectious. Aizawa-sensei called the first round. Kirishima threw the first punch and Akari sidestepped just the right amount, throwing a kick at his exposed side. Kirishima winced but didn't falter, launching blow after blow. He fought completely directly, Akari noticed, steadily advancing forward like a battering ram. His punches had a bit of practice behind them, though they were wild, unrefined. Akari caught a hook on her forearm and elbowed him in the chest, forcing the boy to take a step back. She swung an axe kick before he could recover, carefully holding back as she struck down his unhardened shoulder. He stumbled, barely keeping his footing. Whoa, that was fast. He rushed forward and she weaved through every punch easily, leaning just out of range. Despite that, he only grinned wider. For Akari, sparring with her classmates was a control exercise. It was easy to regulate her strength after decades of living on Earth and practicing with her dad. But actual combat meant that she had to regulate every movement, every touch, constantly keeping her speed at human levels. And her attacks, well, she really didn't want to murder her classmates. I'm going to kill you, bastard. Except maybe Bakugo. He was loud and annoying. She couldn't lower her own reflexes, though. Even when she stood still, Kirishima's inexperienced punches moved at a snail's pace. Her mind wandered to the rest of her classmates as they sparred at the edge of her vision. It was incredibly sad to watch Aizawa-sensei teach Kaminari how to throw a basic punch, his arms wobbly and thumbs inside his fist. Sure, none of her classmates were actually as old as she was, but they were still nearing human adulthood and entering a profession based on combat. Heroes primarily fought with their quirks, almost to the point of relying on them. While there were heroes like Aizawa-sensei without physical, combative ability, they were almost completely overshadowed. Akari understood why most humans didn't focus much on martial arts, but to someone like her it was a little disconcerting. You must practice a ton, Midoriya. Akari blinked, surprised. Thanks, Kirishima. Akari zoned back in to deflect a punch, landing a clean palm strike on Kirishima's chin. The boy went flying off the mat, back hitting the ground hard. She internally let out a sigh of relief when Kirishima took her hand, unharmed, letting her pull him to his feet. You were holding back a lot, huh? Kirishima stated. Akari nodded, a touch guilty. Yeah, I'm sorry. Kirishima shook his head. Nah, it's cool. I have a long way to go. But Midoriya, how'd you get that good? You fight so fluidly. Akari shrugged. I train a lot, I guess. My dad taught me. Todoroki's eyes flicked to her from the other mat, suddenly interested. Oh, I see. You must have practiced a ton. Akari smiled. Not many people seemed to notice that, especially humans, who believed her strength was from a lucky quirk instead of decades of effort. Thanks, Kirishima. Switch, Aizawa-sensei called out. And the sparring students rotated. Akari turned just in time to see Zero fall over from trying to kick too high, deepening Aizawa-sensei's scowl even further. Kaminari was on the ground, unmoving. Heaven, he's going to kill them, Akari muttered. I didn't take you for someone religious, Akari. Sue, her new partner, glanced up at her in question. Akari blinked. What? Oh, yeah, I believe in gods and stuff. I mean, humans already have quirks and magic. It doesn't seem too far-fetched. I wasn't judging you, Kiro, Sue said. I apologize if I came off as direct or rude. It's just in my nature to say what I think. I think that's pretty cool, Sue, Akari said honestly. Someone blunt yet true is very trustworthy. Sue nodded just as Aizawa-sensei called them off. The frog-like girl immediately fired off a set of kicks, launching off the ground like a spring. Akari ducked under an impressive dropkick, watching Sue's dark green hair fly up at the movement. The girl landed smoothly, twisting into a roundhouse kick that clipped Akari's nose. Akari punched at her stomach and Sue flipped back out of range. Sue's fighting style was the complete opposite of Kirishima's, airborne and full of kicks instead of his pure brawling. She wasn't bad. Sue leaned back a full 90 degrees, dodging a hook before aiming a blow at Akari's head. She was certainly flexible, possibly from her mutation. Akari didn't really know much about frogs. What abilities does her mutation give you? Akari asked, curious. She was starting to push Sue back now, kick by kick. A couple. Akari blocked a punch, feeling the girl's notably larger hand. Things, Kiro. I have stronger legs and a very long tongue. I also swim really well. Akari caught Sue's leg and threw her, the frog-like girl rolling with the impact and stopping just inside the mat. That's kinda cool. Where I'm from, there aren't many mutation quirks, more like none, so I think they're pretty interesting. Sue croaked, moving into a crouch. Next she was going to. Akari sidestepped and Sue's legs flew past her, her eyes wide before a perfectly timed uppercut sent the airborne girl tumbling to the ground. Sue came to a stop outside the area, staring up at Akari from the ground. A lot of people would disagree with you, Sue murmured. Mutation quirks aren't looked kindly upon, especially after the drift. Well, they're dumb, Akari stated simply. I don't think any people in our class are like that, either. Sue looked at her for a moment before nodding. I guess so, Kiro. Her last opponent was clearly excited, the floating gym shirt bouncing in place. Toru was wearing short sleeves, Akari realized, so without focusing on her mana she couldn't tell where the invisible girl's arms were. Clever. I won't go easy on you, Akari, Toru declared. Akari smiled. I wouldn't. She stepped back on reflex, a slight breeze brushing her face. Toru hadn't even waited for Aizawa-sensei before attacking. Hey, a disembodied laugh was the only response she got as Toru moved again. Her sleeves slashly wildly. Akari focused on her shirt as she blocked, trying to trace the girl as invisible fists crashed against her forearms. Akari couldn't fight blind like her dad could. She knew the general area where Toru was from her still visible clothes. But with no way to see her arms, nearly all of Toru's punches landed, impossible to counter. You're being really mean, you know, Akari complained. Toru giggled. It's not like I can make myself visible. And Akari, you're barely affected. Akari couldn't turn her godly durability off, either, which was pretty unfair. But that wouldn't matter if Toru pushed her off the mat. Toru must have worked really hard to be a hero with an ability like hers, and it showed. Her footsteps were quiet, blending in with the loud voices around them. Toru was getting more confident, pushing Akari back against the mat. Attacking Toru's shirt wasn't working, so Akari improvised throwing twisting hooks and swinging her leg for where she guessed Toru's head was. The floating uniform crumpled in at the last moment, and Akari's roundhouse kick hit nothing but air. If Akari could see her face, she bet Toru would be grinning her wide smile, her bright blue eyes glittering as she danced out of range yet again. Maybe she was going about this the wrong way. Akari automatically stepped back when she saw her shorts raise, letting the kick fly by. She dived in with a palm strike, knocking Toru back in the opening, instead of trying to react in time. All Akari needed to do was predict her movements, now that she had a decent handle on how fast she was moving. Akari swept low for Toru's legs, forcing her to leap up. Timing it perfectly, Akari grabbed the space above her and caught an invisible fist in her palm. Gotcha, Akari cheered. Oh fuck, Akari twisted, throwing Toru over her shoulder in a fluid move. The invisible girl shrieked as she was swung down an arc and slammed into the mat. The breath left her in an audible gasp. Quickly, Akari pinned Toru's other arm down, giving her no time to escape. You surrender, Toru. Toru struggled a bit, Akari's grip not budging at all, before letting out a sigh. Fine, I give up. It's unfair, you're way too strong, Akari. Akari grinned down at her. Thanks, that wasn't a compliment. Akari stood, pulling the girl up with her. Toru swayed a bit with the movement, brushing against Akari's arm as she regained her footing. You're pretty strong too, Toru. Toru snorted, still panting. That's why you didn't even break a sweat. I mean it, Akari insisted, staring where she guessed her eyes were. Your form is really good, and you have a lot of talent. She really wished she could see Toru's face right now. Wait, Akari could do that. Sapphire eyes blinked into existence, her long silver hair forming out of nothing like an illusion. Really? Toru paused. Oh, I'm invisible. Why? Hi, Akari said, watching Toru's cheeks flush red as she got her breath back. Anyway, I think you just need more experience. Want to spar again later? Toru stared back. Sure, Akari smiled. Cool. She was cut off as Mina screeched at the top of her lungs. Oh my god, is that Toru? Izuku hadn't even noticed that night had fallen, stars visible against the sky and streets nearly empty. That happened sometimes, hours slipping through his hand like grains of sand before he knew it. He'd most likely patrolled far longer than he was supposed to, but Izuku didn't really mind. Hero work wasn't really work for him, it was just something easy yet satisfying to do when he wasn't teaching. Staving off the eternal boredom was his real job. He stopped on the edge of a high building, relaxing in the view of the world below. Everything was silent, as it rarely was after humanity returned. As much as he loved the constant clamor and voices that told him that the drift was over, moments like this were precious. The air shifted, and Izuku's hand snapped up on reflex. Something soft caught between his fingers, a twitching red feather trying to escape his grip. Damn, your reflexes are fast. A man landed a few meters away, wearing an open jacket and a yellow visor over his eyes. Most noticeably for Izuku, though, were the huge red wings poking out of his back. Izuku shrugged. Thanks, He held up the feather. Drop this. The feather glided out of Izuku's hand, flying into the man's wings, so he could control them telekinetically. That was interesting. Fuji couldn't do that. You're a hero, right? Izuku was pretty sure he was the only top hero with wings, and that was named after a bird. He grinned. Yeah, that's me, the number 3. You must be Atlas. You're ranked 3rd. Wow, you must be strong, then. You don't recognize me. The man looked surprised. Izuku squinted at him for a moment before it clicked. Oh wait, I know you. You're the bird guy. My students love you. The bird guy just stared at him. My name's Hawks. I can't say I've ever gotten this reaction before. Sorry, I don't know many heroes. Seriously? But you're a hero. You should at least know the top 10. Izuku rubbed his horn and thought. Well, I've met All Might. He was pretty funny, I guess. Hawks swept a hand through his own hair. Well, whatever. I wouldn't say I'm strong, but I am really fast. I heard rumors about you, and had to see if you were as speedy as they say. I know I'm Hawks, but... Cool. So do you want to race or something? Hawks blinked. Wow, no one's ever asked me that before. Really? That sucks. I know, right? They just give up immediately, because I'm Hawks, saying I just want more bragging rights. Which is true, but I also want to race. Izuku nodded in sympathy. My wife and daughter worked together to trip me up. Now, this one time I was ahead. And they made this. Izuku stretched out his hands. Really big rope of condensed light that I never saw coming. Totally unfair. Hawks winced. Do you usually win, then? Izuku skillfully changed the subject. Anyway, where are we racing to? UA. Hawks raised an eyebrow at the deflection. Nah, you teach there. Bet you know some super shortcut. Fine. Alright, let's go for the... Izuku suddenly sighed. What? Hawks asked. Izuku waved a hand. Monster attack. It's the third one today, for some reason. Hawks still had a lazy smile on his face, posture completely loose, but when Izuku glanced at him his eyes were alert. Where? Izuku hummed. Right here, apparently. Weird, never had a portal form on me before. You're pretty casual about this. Hawks noted. Most heroes are terrified of these things. Are you? Izuku asked. Hawks smirked. Nope. The foreign sense of energy came to a head. Yellow rift tearing into the space in front of them. It was smaller than usual, Izuku observed, and thinner too. But Izuku's senses were prickling, ready, and a hand drifted to the staff on his back. A single figure stepped through before the portal closed. Izuku blinked. The man was tall, almost a head taller than Izuku himself. Two horns extended out of his inkai black hair, long and curled, but neither were as cute as Iri's. He was shirtless, some kind of scaly armor covering his bottom half, and his skin was a crimson red. A single human figure. Then Izuku felt his mana, an overpowering mass that almost felt sickening. Wrong, like a mysterious monster portal multiplied 1,000-fold. Nope, no way was he human. Izuku doubted Hawks could sense mana, but the winged hero tensed next to him, clearly aware of the threat. Greetings, the man boomed, arms wide in front of him, his powerful voice loud enough to wake the entire block. My name is Brius, the hundred-handed one. Hawks snorted. Sorry to break it to you, man, but you only have 2 of them. That's rude, Izuku admonished. I mean, it's probably a title or something. Still sounds pretty dumb. Hawks commented. Isn't your hero title literally just wing hero? Hawks grimaced at the reminder. Well then, what's yo? The air temperature dropped several degrees as Brius narrowed his pitch-black eyes. I do not appreciate being ignored. You, the one with the white hair. You're Izuku, correct? Izuku blinked. Huh, a monster knew who he was. Weird. Yeah, that's me. I am here to kill you, Izuku. Izuku froze. His actual name confirming Brius wasn't from Earth. Bird, you are free to leave, this is none of your business. Hawks burst forward, 2 feathers sharpened in his hands like red blades. Yeah, no thanks. Don't feel like letting you kill my new racing buddy. Brius merely nodded. Protecting your friend. I can respect that. You'll die first, then. And the instant before Hawks struck, Brius moved. If Izuku hadn't been waiting for it, he wasn't sure if he could have reacted in time. But he had, so when the world slowed to a crawl, he was already running. Hawks's eyes were wide, trying to reverse direction with a powerful flap of his wings as he flew back in slow motion inch by inch. The hero's instinct saved him the red fist that would have killed him, instead just grazing his yellow visor. Brius's second punch cut through the still air mercilessly. A direct punch for Hawks's throat that the hero wasn't nearly fast enough to dodge. Izuku blurred in, stopping the lethal blow with his palm and pulling Hawks out of the way by the back of his jacket with his other hand in the same motion. With the momentum he swung a kick, knocking Brius back and giving him some breathing room. You know me, Izuku stated, tense like a coiled spring. His hand still stung a little from that blow. Brius was strong, and he hadn't held back at all with that punch, aiming to kill the human with zero hesitation. Yes, I've heard many tales of you, Prince of Heaven. Brius grinned. I'm quite honored to kill you. Can I ask why you're here to kill me? Izuku asked, curious. That hasn't happened in a while. Heaven's politics were not that intense. And there definitely weren't any struggles for Amaterasu's throne. That didn't mean that there weren't a fair share of people trying to assassinate him or Aurora. But this felt different. Sadly, I can't tell you that. Brius informed regretfully. However, be satisfied with the fact that you will suffer a proud death on the battlefield. I don't think that helps much, man. Hawks quipped. The fact that he had nearly died a second ago didn't even seem to register. How about you take a proud death? The huge mass of feathers suddenly descended from the sky above them, surrounding Brius like a vice. Brius batted at the feathers blindly, the swarm unrelenting as they cut the man again and again, but didn't seem to be doing any damage, merely buying time. Tusk, even using most of my feathers, I can't leave a scratch? Hawks, can you evacuate everyone within a few blocks? Izuku said. Something in his voice made Hawks glance at him, stunned. Of course, but do you really think you can take this guy on alone? He has an incredibly powerful amplification quirk. An ear-splitting crack resounded throughout the entire area, shattering the windows on every building nearby. Every feather was knocked outward in a burst of wind, revealing a now angry Brius, his red hands pressed together in a clap. Never mind, Brius growled. I'm plucking that bird first. Hawks, go. Izuku ordered. Hawks hesitated for a moment, clearly annoyed. You better know what you're doing, Atlas. He jumped up into the sky. Brius lunged for the escaping hero, hands curled in for Hawks's neck. Nope, only for Izuku's fist to catch him in the jaw before he even got close, knocking him clear off the roof. A quick leap put him in front of his still flying enemy, and he spiked Brius down with a powerful kick. The man crashed into the empty street like a meteor, and Izuku could already see feathers carrying the nearby humans away to safety. After trusting the Tahawks, Izuku didn't have anything left to worry about. So you're a monster, right? Izuku asked as the dust settled. Never met one that could talk before. Brius laughed. He didn't seem the least bit affected after being smashed into the ground. Something like that. And you are a god, aren't you? I've killed many of your kind before. Izuku's eyes narrowed. So why do you monsters want me out of the way? Fear. If some monsters were intelligent, then that changed everything. They would have actual strategies and training, instead of random, weak attacks. I may have come here to see how strong you are, God, but that doesn't mean I'm afraid. An extra arm burst out of the monster on either side, his forelimbs rearing back in perfect coordination. Brius grinned, full of malice. It's quite the opposite, really. He clapped his hands together. Izuku formed an air barrier on reflex, the incoming shockwave rippling across it like rain off an umbrella. The force wrecked the street at Izuku's sides, leaving him untouched. The loud, booming sound made him pretty glad that he wasn't any closer, something Brius immediately fixed, stepping into his space to shatter the force field with a fist, already swinging 3 more for Izuku's head. Izuku ducked, sweeping at Brius's legs and twisting with the movement to drive his elbow into Brius's gut. He pushed the arm further in with his other palm, jumping back when the monster tried to grab him. What is that thing on your head? Brius asked. That does not look like it's made out of organic material. Izuku cracked an air whip against the monster's shoulder, and it broke on impact. What do you mean? It totally is. Brius lunged to close the distance, summoning 4 more arms, and now there were 8 different punches to counter. Izuku was starting to lose ground, ducking and weaving and deflecting through the onslaught. He was landing his own hits, but Brius was unrelenting. He'd never fought against anyone with an ability like this. It reminded him of Shoji in a way, but far stronger. At first, creating extra limbs seemed weak, but when you had to block 8 fists with 2 hands you quickly realized that was completely wrong. Brius caught both of Izuku's hands, so on impulse Izuku stabbed his reinforced horn forward, the unexpected attack actually crashing into Brius's gut and giving Izuku an opening. Izuku leaned all the way back, letting the massive limbs fly over his horn, and swung his feet up into Brius's jaw. He pushed off his hands as Brius's fists came down on the street in front of him, landing lightly on the street. Brius raised his arms to attack again, and suddenly found that he couldn't. Dozens of violet chains slithered around his many arms, holding them firm. A roundhouse kick crashed against his cheek, whipping his head to the side. All you do is punch. Doesn't that get boring? Izuku asked. Brius merely looked amused, despite being trapped in place. No, why would my fighting style get boring? Especially when... Izuku's eyes went wide, a surge of mana making him leap back. Like some kind of horror movie, the chains broke, links ripped apart like paper. His arms had increased again. Izuku knew, but now he could barely count them as they swirled around, weaving into yet somehow not tangling with each other. It had to be at least 20. What the fuck? Izuku blurted. I have this many arms. Brius laughed. It was just as loud as before, but now it grated at Izuku's bones and prickled his skin. Oh, how I love seeing the reactions. He was enhancing all of them, Izuku realized. Not only was each limb kept track of, but he was also using his magic on all of them in a ridiculous feat of concentration. The despair when they realize what that nickname means. Brius caught an axe kick with 5 forearms, and then another to the neck as Izuku twisted in midair. Izuku threw a few jabs at his back, but they were batted away easily. A chop or 10 crashed into the back of Izuku's head, making him blink back stars. That you're really good at rock, paper, scissors? Izuku couldn't resist saying. I've never heard of this rock, paper, scissors. Is it some form of combat? Then yes, I must be. Izuku rolled under 7 hooks, barely rising to his feet in time to sidestep another attack and then another. He held back a hiss as twin punches plunged into his chest, probably breaking something. You're really arrogant, Izuku noted. And you're not nearly as strong as I am, Brius growled. Izuku raised an air wall between them, just in time to avoid being grabbed. The barrier bought him a second before shattering into pieces, but Izuku sharpened the fallen pieces and shot them into the monster, doing nothing but ticking him off. Irritating pest. If you give up now, Brius yanked on Izuku's leg, and he kicked the arm away with a jolt of panic. I won't make your death as painful as possible, he roared as an air spike stabbed through his foot, giving Izuku the opening to punch him in the face. No thanks, Izuku responded, forearms starting to ache as he blocked another flurry of fists. Don't feel like dying at all, really. One hand raised from the army of arms to wipe his face, another 2 limbs sprouting out from somewhere. How did he even have room for all of those? Then, the last trace of human mana left the area. The entire surrounding area now bare spare for a few lingering feathers and the annoying monster in front of him. Izuku felt himself smile. Hawks had pulled through, getting every single civilian out of the area within minutes. Finally, Izuku interrupted the monster, cracking his neck. Now we can get started. Brius blinked, taken aback. Wah! Izuku stepped in front of him, staff unslung from his back and swinging in a fluid motion, bright violet lighting up the ruined street. Stance 2, bash. A red swarm of arms rose up to block the blow, but the sheer force continued through with several cracks and sent him skidding to the side. Izuku stabbed his staff down and vaulted over a dozen punches in a clean arc. The glowing metal struck down on Brius's less protected head in that instant, and Izuku hit the street in a roll. Stance 10, uppercut. The sudden blow knocked several arms straight up. Stance 11, double, and his trusty staff rolled back to rest under Izuku's forearm before striking twice with blinding speed in the same instant, dual blows crashing against Brius's sides. Izuku snapped a kick into the monster's gut, pushing his other leg back and raising the weapon to parallel to the ground. Stance 3, pierce. A point-blank range, the stab was lethal. Brius went flying back, his body crashing over the street, many arms flailing out wildly as the wind howled and buildings were ripped apart around them. The monster tumbled across the ground before even more arms flooded out, digging into the street until he came to a stop. Slowly Brius straightened up to his full height again, his chest now completely covered in limbs. There were just so many, and at once they all curled into fists and knife hands like a mind-bending mirage. "So that's your trump card," Brius remarked. If Izuku squinted, he could see something gold dripping out of his stomach. "Blood. A weapon. I don't understand how it made you so much stronger, but it's still not enough, Prince of Heaven." Izuku sighed, lazily twirling the staff between his fingers. "You know how annoying it is to hit someone with no way was he counting those? 70 arms. Well, you probably do, actually, but it's really irritating. That's so many arms for you to block with, and I only have one staff." There was a spotlight light coming from somewhere above them, a helicopter. Izuku didn't dare look away to check, his mind racing. The pierce definitely should have killed him. Izuku had relied on the element of surprise, combining several stances together in the perfect pattern, poking away at the massive arms to land a good hit. Clearly, it did something. He'd hurt him, but Brius was still standing. Brius cocked his head to the side. "I've never met an opponent like you before. Usually, they're screaming in terror by now." Izuku actually was, just internally. "You have been a strong opponent." Brius nodded. "In respect, it's only fair if you die to my full strength." Oh, don't worry about that. You really don't have to." The massive arms got even larger, and now Izuku really wanted to throw up as he raised his staff, reinforcing it to its limit. "Do that. I, Brius the Hundred-Handed One, acknowledge you, Izuku, Prince of Heaven. Meet your end at my many hands." Why did the monster have to be so dramatic? Izuku barely had the energy left to talk. Brius wasn't any quicker now. If anything, he was a little slower. But that didn't matter when he was swinging 100 fists forward at once, an inevitable wave of red death. There was no room to dodge. Izuku spun the staff, faster and faster and faster until it was a blur of violet in his hands, its outline a near solid circle that made the air sing. Stance 4, shield. Izuku grit his teeth as the barrage crashed down on him. Only a moment later, a fierce tsunami. Enhanced blow after blow pounded against his staff, each hit a painful jolt against his tired arms. The wind blew back his hair wildly, and Izuku couldn't even spare a hand to brush it back down. An interesting technique, Izuku. He couldn't even see the monster's face through the storm of red and violet. But how long can it last? Not long, from how his body was starting to shake and how his poor staff was starting to break apart from the force. But Izuku ignored that, focusing on the rhythm, the way around half were slamming into his staff at each beat, waiting for the right time. And then it came, all 100 red fists rearing back for the final blow. Izuku forced himself faster, twisting around with the ridiculous amount of circular motion to deliver a powerful blow, air curling around the staff's end. Stance 5, whirlwind. The mighty tornado swirled through the air, throwing up 100 arms with it as small cuts formed all over Brius. The monster knocked backward, and for a single, precious moment, the monster was completely open, his wound bleeding gold. Izuku reared his arm back, Stance 6, javelin, and launched his weapon with all of his remaining energy. Brius's black eyes went wide as the staff struck true, stabbing through his chest in the same spot as before. This time it went through, catching halfway out of his body. Golden dust drifted out, floating through the air, and Brius's grin finally fell as he disintegrated into nothing. "Gotcha." Izuku's voice felt heavy, just like his eyelids. He really needed a nap. Izuku turned to walk home, his now significantly more ruined staff sheathed on his back, his perfectly intact horn sitting firmly on his totally messed up hair, the destroyed block around him completely empty, and a news helicopter buzzing somewhere above, probably recording. He'd deal with that last thing tomorrow.